patriotism is. It's got to be inside.
They decorate every table inside Jane's Lunch, a third-generation diner.
I feel helpless here in Berryville. What can I do? I can't go to New York and help with those people. I can give blood, but that's the extent of what I can do.
Population 3,000, Berryville is small-town America. Berryville is Mayberry, only instead of Sheriff Andy Taylor, you find Officer Anthony Roper.
It's kind of funny. I've driven around the last couple of days, and an older gentleman, retired military gentleman, been saluting me and really coming up and asking and appreciating us. And I guess this as a whole, seeing how the country's reacted to all of this, that people being very patriotic.
But there is more than patriotism here. There is defiance. Just after Pearl Harbor, a Japanese admiral said, "I fear all we have done is to have awakened a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Listen now to some of the voices of Berryville.
I'm not Bush, but if I was, I'd be relocating the B-52s to Guam. We got to find out who did it.
I'm sure the President Bush is going to take care of business.
You want him to?
Hell yeah. Everybody's pissed, ain't they? Sure.
They usually sell 10 copies of the New York Times at the Berryville newsstand. Wednesday morning, they sold 80, along with every other paper they had. They talk of little else over latte and chocolate chip cookies.
First is, I can't believe it, and now there's such anger, and we better blast the hell out of somebody. Everybody's ready to flatten someone for having done this.
The sleeping giant stirs again now in a small town. Candy Crowley, CNN, Berryville, Virginia.
Our day here is done. Our coverage certainly is not. Jim Clancy and Colleen McEdwards from Atlanta, Garrett Gutley from here in New York continue our coverage. We'll see you later today.
Get a bump shot.
I think Osama bin Laden better say his prayers.
A call to action from U.S. leaders as a nation and a world continue to struggle to understand the extent of the devastating terrorist attacks on the United States.
While around the clock, hour by hour, minute by minute, grieving family members in New York and Washington wait for any word of their loved ones.
And a dramatic late development. 8 people arrested at New York airports. 4 of them had apparently been challenged when they tried to board a plane on the day of the attacks.
Hello and welcome. We're going to continue now CNN's extensive coverage of America under attack. I'm Jim Clancy.
And I'm Colleen McEdwards. It is now some 63 hours since the worst ever terrorist attack on American soil, and thoughts are turning to retribution.
An emotional President Bush Thursday vowing to defeat the terrorists.
Now's the time for the country to be united, and through the tears of sadness, I see an opportunity. Make no mistake about it, this nation is sad. But we're also tough and resolute. And now's an opportunity to do generations a favor by coming together and whipping terrorism, hunting it down, finding it, and holding them accountable. The nation must understand this is now the focus of my administration.
In New York, the rescue efforts continue at this hour, but expectations are shrinking that many people could have survived the collapse of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, and this is why. CNN has obtained these remarkable pictures shot just a few hours ago of the devastation in Lower Manhattan. Just look here. What you're seeing is actually an inside view of the ruins of the World Trade Center right there.
And now, just a few miles from that scene, more arrests, at least 8 people detained at New York airports amid concerns about another attempted hijack.
That's right. Sources say that 4 people were seen at one of the airports the day of the attacks, but fled the ticket counter when challenged. Another man was carrying fake pilot identification. We go now to Mike Betcher for more on this investigation. Mike?
Well, Colleen, indeed that is true. The airport's open today, but the police were closely watching. One of those people arrested was at Kennedy Airport. He was carrying a fake pilot's ID. He was arrested and taken away for questioning. Also at Kennedy Airport, there were another 4 or 5 people who had either false documentation or were in the country illegally who were also arrested and taken away for questioning. At New York's LaGuardia Airport, police detained at least 2 other men for questioning. After the spate of arrests and detentions, all New York area airports were closed again. A few other airports in the U.S. have also shut down once more because of security concerns. Attorney General John Ashcroft said FBI agents are making progress in their investigation, adding that they have identified the hijackers aboard all 4 ill-fated jets.
The total number of hijackers, to our best estimate and our best knowledge given the information at this time, on the 4 planes that crashed was at least 18, unless contradicted by evidence which we wouldn't anticipate. 2 planes had 5 hijackers and 2 other planes had 4 hijackers each.
Mohammed Atta, shown in this photograph, and Marwan al-Shari are 2 of the men on that list of 18, according to federal investigative sources. Both held United Arab Emirate passports, but it's not clear if they are actually citizens of that country. The lives the 2 men led are the objects of an intensive international investigation, stretching from Florida to Germany. In Hamburg, Germany, federal police launched an extensive search of an apartment shared by Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shari last February. During an additional search of another Hamburg apartment, a woman was taken away for questioning. She clutched a baby in her arms as German police tried to hide her with a sheet. During the night, a total of 8 apartments were searched in the Hamburg area. Back in the U.S. in Pompano Beach, Florida, FBI agents converged on a small rental car company called Warwick's. Records show that Atta rented 2 automobiles at that location.
Well, the first contract, he only put on 200 miles, 254 miles or something like that. That was very small. That's exceptionally small. The next contract was the 2-week rental, and he drove 1,915 miles, which he had told me he'd been over on the West Coast. He called me from over on the West Coast. 4,000 FBI agents have fanned out across the country, knocking on hundreds of doors. But before this is closed, and over, they're going to have to knock on tens of thousands more doors. Colleen?
All right, it's Jim Clancy. Mike, I want to just make it very clear here. What has gone on at the airports? Were these people actually trying to board airplanes using pilot's identification? What were they trying to do?
Well, the one person had the pilot's identification. It's not completely clear right now. He was in the airport. We're not sure if he was trying to get on the plane. We do know the other 7 people who were arrested for having false documentation, for example, or not being in the country legally. They were trying to get on those aircraft to make flights, and what raised red flags was the fact that they had open-ended tickets, no set return date, and they were challenged. And we're told some of them tried to get away, but all were arrested. And we don't know, however, not all of them tried to get away, but we do not know, however, if they are connected at all with this current terrorist plot being investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
All right, Mike Betcher, thanks to you for bringing us up to date on the investigation. Colleen?
All right, Jim, thanks. Well, the rescue and recovery operation in New York City still remains very dangerous. The mayor is urging people to be patient because the process is so painstaking. And Garrick Utley joins us right now from the scene there. Garrick?
Good morning, Colleen, here from Midtown Manhattan. The news today, part of it is what you just heard, what Mike Betcher was reporting, the airport's being closed down because of those arrests of suspects. Behind me is that by now very familiar and sad scene, the plume of smoke and dust rising in lower Manhattan under the arc lights where the rescue work is continuing. And the news also, sadly, is that today no new survivors have been discovered, have been unearthed there. The missing now is estimated officially, as you may have heard, at more than 4,760 at the last estimate, and it's only an estimate. That's through a census that was taken by companies who had offices in the building. Also, this has been a day of bomb scares. By noon today, there had been 90, that's 90 false alarms, bomb scares in stores and schools and office buildings. The police had to come, people had to leave for an hour or so, adults, children in a number of schools. That was now perhaps to be expected. It's a terrorism of its own, if you might call it that. And tomorrow, of course, President George Bush will be coming to Manhattan. What's interesting this time is that when a president comes, his agenda, his plan is carefully laid out, but not this time for obvious security reasons. The White House isn't saying where he's going to go, although we expect him to visit the site of the tragedy, or how long he's going to stay here, but President Bush will be here tomorrow afternoon in Manhattan. Let's go now downtown and near the site to get some extraordinary close-up looks as to the damage that was caused there by the explosions on Tuesday. Our Gary Tuckman is on the scene. Gary?
Hello, Garrick. It's now been 63 hours since terrorists flew 2 passenger planes into the World Trade Center towers. And small fires still burn, and the smoke is still intense. Hundreds of emergency officials are on the scene 24 hours a day, feverishly looking for survivors. But as you said, the bad news is no survivors were found today. There was some potentially exciting news earlier today. According to officials at the police and at hospitals, 5 firefighters were pulled out of the wreckage. Firefighters who were believed to have been there since this terrorist incident on Tuesday, but there was some confusion. Rescue workers thought that's what they saw, so they said it to the police and the hospital officials. It turned out these firemen fell into the wreckage today while they were being rescuers. They were trapped for several hours. It's good news that they were pulled out, but they were not survivors of this terrorist incident. We hear many times it's like a war zone out there. The rubble, you see it right there. It's just incredible. Tons and tons of wreckage on the ground. It looks like a war zone you hear, but it really, literally is a war zone. We have debris in a 10-block by 10-block area. There's a chapel nearby called St. Paul's Chapel. It's the oldest church in New York City. It's about 250 years old. And there is debris and rubble all over the yard of the church. There is a cemetery next to the church. The cemetery has tombstones from the 18th century, and some of those tombstones have been toppled over because of what happened at the World Trade Center on Tuesday. One of the concerns at the site there is there are 3 buildings surrounding the World Trade Center complex which are said to be structurally unsound because of the explosions. There has been great concern that those buildings could potentially collapse, and that's the only time we don't have officials on the scene 24 hours a day. There have been some times when they've had to evacuate because there's been creaking of the buildings, there's been windows popping out, and that's the only time the rescuers have left. Yesterday, the first time they heard a warning about one of these buildings, everyone ran out of there. It was a very sad, dramatic picture, watching these people who have been working so hard running away, but they are back on the scene as we speak. One other potential problem, the weather is deteriorating right now. Ever since Tuesday, the weather has been nice for these types of operations, but right now it's getting very windy, it's very cloudy. They're expecting a lot of rain tonight, and that could be a big problem as they continue to try to look for survivors. Garrick, back to you.
Thank you very much, Gary Tuckman there in Lower Manhattan. What Gary was showing us, and what we've been seeing these last couple of days, those scenes of the devastation and the death there in Lower Manhattan, of course, was caused, it is believed, by an organization led by an individual, Osama bin Laden by name. Today, Secretary of State Powell put him at the top of the list. In fact, Osama bin Laden is now the most wanted person, most wanted man in the world, with a more multi-million-dollar prize on his head, if you will. But who is Osama bin Laden? Where is he right now? And what does he really want?
The who is the easiest answer. Osama bin Laden is 44, a millionaire born in Saudi Arabia who has used his wealth to finance terror to fulfill his crusade against the United States. The where of bin Laden is mainly Afghanistan, where he built his terrorist camps. The Taliban regime there, which has sheltered bin Laden, has imposed its version and vision of Islam on Afghanistan. Women can work only in health and education fields and have few rights. There is a ban on using the internet and on importing movies, musical instruments, and even playing cards. Western aid workers have been put on trial, charged with the crime of preaching Christianity. In March, the Taliban blew up a pair of 2,000-year-old statues of Buddha, despite international appeals to save the treasures that had no place in the purist Islamic society the Taliban are trying to build. If bin Laden and the Taliban have much in common, bin Laden is more engaged in backing fellow Arabs in their conflict with Israel, which is backed by the United States, and in attacking the leaders of his homeland, Saudi Arabia, whom he sees as the materialistic pawns of a militaristic United States, which has stationed its troops there. And so it is the United States that has become, in Osama bin Laden's eyes, the evil enemy that needs to be cut down in size and power. Literally, brutally cut down.
Let's get some more expert insights about Osama bin Laden and what may be in his future and in our future from Barney Rubin, who is one of the leading specialists on not only bin Laden but also Afghanistan and the Taliban movement there. Good morning. Thank you for being with us. I think a question in many people's mind about Osama bin Laden is we're told we don't know where he is. We can't get our hands on him. But is he vulnerable or is he invulnerable now after these attacks?
Well, no human being is invulnerable. But I think it's a very difficult problem to deal with because we're not dealing with a centralized organization with a name and a headquarters. We're dealing with a network of people of which he facilitates, he empowers, he helps it, but he doesn't control the whole thing. And he doesn't, as I say, no, there's no headquarters. It's like something that doesn't have a center that you can attack very easily.
But we do know that he's been based in Afghanistan. He's had training camps there. We do know he's been sheltered, has been protected in a way by the Taliban movement, which runs most of Afghanistan right now. President Bush has said we're not going to distinguish between a government that shelters a terrorist and the terrorist himself. So what's this relationship between bin Laden and the Taliban leaders of Afghanistan?
Well, bin Laden's history in Afghanistan goes back a long way, and we have to remember that we, the United States, had a role in it. He came to Afghanistan after the Soviet invasion and played a role as part of the operation that we ran and directed in fighting against the Soviet Union. He returned there after he was expelled from Sudan in 1996, and only after being there for some time linked up again with the Taliban. In the past couple of years, as the Taliban became more and more isolated, they came to depend more and more on him and his many Arab followers in the country.
But do the Taliban, their leaders, and bin Laden, do they have common interests? Or is there some kind of tension, or could some kind of tension or space between them developed or be exploited by the United States?
Well, there is tension between them right now, because the Taliban did not originate to carry out bin Laden's goal of a worldwide fight against the United States. They originated to impose their agenda on Afghanistan, to rebuild it in their very puritanical, repressive way. And the question for them is, are they now going to continue their alliance with this individual who has made it more difficult for them to get the kind of international assistance they might seek, or are they going to pursue their national goals?
What do you think?
Well, I think they haven't decided. And the problem for the United States and the rest of the world that is horrified by these events is to try to force them to make that choice and enable them to make that choice, to reject him.
But you study the Taliban. You're an expert on the Taliban.
Yes.
Can that be done?
I very much doubt it. The top leadership of the Taliban is now very close to Osama. However, within the broad framework of the Taliban movement, there are many people who wish he would disappear.
Now, terrorism over the years we know has been used to achieve some goal, get land, power, political recognition, but that's not the case here. He's not asking the United States for anything. There's no negotiating position. There's no issue like that. This is unusual, isn't it? And doesn't it, in a way, strengthen his position?
Well, most of these movements are real political movements based in a particular society, as you said, with political goals. In his case, it's much more of an ideological or even apocalyptic movement for a cause, and his followers are drawn from all nations as well. That's really the difference between him and the Taliban. The Taliban are an extremist movement, but they're an Afghan movement with a kind of national extremist agenda.
So we know it's hard to get at him. If somebody were able one day to remove him, would that solve the problem, or would this movement continue without bin Laden? Is he indispensable?
He might be important, but of course he's not indispensable. We focus too much on him as an individual. Even in Afghanistan, there are other leaders of Arab extremist groups who are there with him who may be almost as important as he is, though they are not as well known. It's a network. A network is something that operates through linkages, not through dictation from above.
This evening or early this Friday morning here in New York City, if you were to put your money, maybe even your reputation on the line, how do you see this playing out? Will someone get to Osama bin Laden and remove him?
Well, eventually, of course, that will happen. I don't see him dying peacefully in his bed, but I don't think that's going to happen very easily in the near future unless there is a real struggle within the Taliban movement and within the Pakistani military that has been supporting the Taliban. and someone makes a decision to do that.
Barney Rubin, thanks very much for lending us your expertise this morning here in New York. Back now to you, Colleen and Jim.
All right, Garrett Utley, thanks so much. U.S. President George W. Bush says terrorism is now the focus of his administration. White House correspondent Major Garrett joins us now with the latest on that. Major saying terrorism now the focus, also saying this is a new kind of war.
A new kind of war, the first war of the 21st century, Colleen. You can see behind me the lights of the White House mansion have been dimmed, but the security apparatus that protects the president and the White House family is on a very edgy state of alert. Earlier today, the perimeter around the White House, the security perimeter, was extended, and throughout the afternoon and throughout the evening there have been a series of false alarms as far as security is concerned around here at the White House. Even now, as I'm speaking to you, a helicopter circles overhead the White House. You can hear the thump, thump, thump of the helicopter blades in the evening as it searches around the White House perimeter, searching for we not know what, but nevertheless searching resolutely to keep the White House and the White House family secure. The president today was asked many questions about this new war. He said the new war of the 21st century. He was also asked how it has all affected him personally. He described the events in New York City and across the river in Virginia at the Pentagon as a terrible, terrible tragedy.
I think about the families, the children. I'm a loving guy, and I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do, and I intend to do it. And this is a terrible moment. But this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
You can see the emotion etched on the president's face. Covering the White House, I can tell you it's sort of hard to put all this into some sort of historical context, Colleen. Many U.S. presidents have had to deal with the tragedy of sending thousands of U.S. service personnel to their deaths fighting a war. But never before in recorded U.S. history has a U.S. president had to preside over the deaths of so many civilians who never once imagined themselves becoming casualties in any kind of war, be it the first war of the 21st century or any kind of war. The emotional impact on this president must in fact be enormous. You saw just a little bit of it there in that response to a question he was asked today in the Oval Office. The president, of course, has met with his national security team repeatedly. He's also met with members of Congress, one of them, John Warner, a Republican from Virginia, a former Secretary of the U.S. Navy, and a senior member of the Armed Services Committee, said this country, this president, must be prepared for a very long and sustained effort against global terrorism.
This will be a prolonged engagement. It will be over time, and it may be necessary to time and time again deal forcibly with those who would challenge the security of this country and indeed inflict any damage upon us. I've never seen a president more resolute, more determined, very calm, very confident, very forthright.
Toward the end of giving the president all the tools he needs to prosecute whatever type of war against global terrorism, Congress is preparing to pass a $40 billion emergency supplemental bill to help the president not only continue on the investigation into the catastrophe in New York and in Virginia at the Pentagon, but to prosecute a war against global terrorism, and also to provide him the legal authority to do so. Congress hopes to get that emergency spending bill and a resolution authorizing a use of force for this president done at the very latest on Saturday, possibly as early as today, later on today. Colleen?
Major, how much is being made there of Secretary Powell essentially saying that Osama bin Laden is a prime suspect in this, and yet other officials sort of not wanting to go quite that far at this point?
Well, there's no secret, Colleen, here at the White House or among the president's most senior advisors, that Osama bin Laden, almost from moment one, was at the top of the list of those suspected of either being the person who organized and executed this or being very close to the person who organized and executed this act of terrorism. It is left to Secretary Powell to sort of identify him. Secretary Powell is the lead diplomat for the United States, working with partners that the United States hope will become part of a very broad coalition against whomever the United States tells the world it believes was responsible for this act of terrorism. And as the chief diplomat, it was left to him to sort of move those potential coalition partners in that direction by saying, look, we think we're moving in this direction. You should be so advised, because in the not too distant future, we're going to be asking you to join in this effort against this foe. Colleen?
Understood. CNN's Major Garrett. Thanks. Jim?
A lot of the focus, of course, is on Osama bin Laden. He is reportedly sheltered by the Taliban, the rulers of Afghanistan. And in turn, it is Pakistan that supports the Taliban there. Throughout the day, diplomatic pressure being brought to bear on Pakistan. Let's turn to Tom Mintier. He is in Islamabad for the latest. Tom?
Jim, that pressure must be immense. And I was sitting here listening to Major Garrett talking about the nervousness and unease that is going on right now in Washington. I can tell you that halfway around the world here in Pakistan, there is that same feeling of unease and nervousness. This morning, the airspace over Pakistan was closed. All commercial flights kept on the ground or kept in the air away from Pakistan. Apparently, the military conducting exercises with the military fighters up in the air. That was for several hours. Normally, flights come in here in the very early hours, and they couldn't get down to land. They couldn't take off. Basically, the entire country's airspace was closed off. That made a lot of people very, very nervous that something maybe would be happening this morning here, either in Pakistan or Afghanistan, the possibility of a military strike. As I said in the beginning, the diplomatic pressure is immense. Just yesterday, the new U.S. ambassador to Pakistan, Wendy Chamberlain, had a meeting where she presented her credentials to the Pakistani president. Now, this was only supposed to take 5 to 10 minutes, but she had a second meeting once she met him and presented the credentials in a private room. And then after the other 4 ambassadors had presented their credentials, she sat down for over an hour with the Pakistani president, bringing a very long and probably detailed message from the U.S. government to Pakistan. Now, after that meeting, the U.S. ambassador told me that the Pakistani president pledged his support to the United States fully.
The President made a very strong statement that he was with us, and I think that's probably all I'm able to say at this point. But let me just say that it was positive, it was strong. He repeated several times during the meeting that he was with us.
President Musharraf himself also went on television and has made numerous statements trying to reverse a perception that some feel is held around the world that Pakistan would not side with the United States in this. So the president himself has made it very clear where he stands and his government stands.
Pakistan has been extending cooperation to international efforts to combat terrorism in the past and will continue to do so in the future. Countries must join hands in this common cause. I wish to assure President Bush once again and the United States government of our unstinted cooperation in the fight against terrorism.
That assurances is being asked and requested by the Pakistani government to be backed up by actions. Supposedly the U.S. State Department has asked Pakistan to stop supplying fuel across the border to the Taliban, has asked them to close the border with Afghanistan, and basically provide some intelligence to the United States. There is also the possibility that the U.S. would want airspace over Pakistan to be cleared up in case there was a military strike. So all of these things are being discussed by diplomats and by heads of state back and forth at this hour.
Tom, let me ask you this. When you look at Pakistan, its support for the Taliban, General Musharraf is one leader there. Now, he seized power. Are there others in the military that might not like to see Pakistan pulling the rug out from under the Taliban, the rulers of Afghanistan?
I'm absolutely sure there are divisions within the military leadership about which way to go, whether the Pakistanis should support the U.S. move when it comes to military action. But you also have to remember where the president came from. He was the leader of the military before the bloodless coup that occurred here in Pakistan. So he is indeed the president, but he is also the top military commander of Pakistan. So trying to keep the troops in line is going to be a real challenge for him, because they are split. There are divisions about support for the Taliban. There are many military commanders in Pakistan and part of the intelligence service that do indeed supply not only information but supplies and other things that they've been accused of providing to the Taliban and to Osama bin Laden. So it's going to be a very difficult political struggle for the Pakistani president to keep things in line here if he indeed sides with the United States.
All right, Tom Mintier there at the center of diplomatic activity this day as the U.S. presses on. And we should note that the investigation into Tuesday's attacks is now extending right around the world. In the Philippines, President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo saying the Philippines and the United States staged a joint raid at a Manila hotel early on Friday. She said the Bayview Hotel is located just in front of the U.S. Embassy, but Mrs. Arroyo gave no other details.
And of course, the question remains tonight, how? How were the terrorists able to plan and carry out these attacks? Slowly, possible answers are beginning to come clear. Sheila McVicker has that.
As the FBI continues its investigations and police forces around the world seek clues to the identities of the hijackers, it is already possible to say some things about the kind of operation required to carry out these attacks. Attacks, analysts say, that must have been at least months, possibly years, in the planning.
They've chosen their target very carefully. They've assessed the level of security at the points of departure for all of these aircraft. They've done their homework very well indeed.
If the hijackers and their handlers, investigators suggest perhaps as many as 50 people came from outside the United States, their first problem was documents, passports, identities that would permit them to enter the U.S. without detection, setting off no alarm bells. And that, analysts say, would not have been difficult.
Infiltrating using false documentation, using identity theft is relatively easy and requires some planning, but it's not impossible to get access to that in many parts of the world.
Months or even years ago, they would have slipped into communities trained to attract no attention, perhaps not even knowing, say terrorism experts, there were others who would be involved in the plot. And to evade American electronic eavesdropping, there would have been little telephone contact. Instead, months spent in planning and study, searching flight guides for long-haul flights, flights heavy with explosive fuel, and testing again and again airport security.
I would suspect that they would have had months of reconnaissance to see and test and probe the security of getting the weaponry on board.
It's quite possible that maybe these hijackers have carried out a trial run or several trial runs, taking the weapons that we believe at this moment that they had on board through security checkpoints time and again to see how often, how easy it is to do.
Little was left to chance, even the risk of failure minimized by hijacking so many planes. Investigators say at least some of those involved were pilots. At least 2 suspects are known to have trained on a flight simulator. And some aviation security consultants suggest they may have used a widely available computer game to practice flying.
The first attack was apparently coming sort of straight down Manhattan.
A computer game that could take a terrorist right to his target.
When you got there in real life, you'd feel like you'd been there before. You would know what you were looking for.
A game that even provides precise geographic coordinates. The reconnaissance, the planning, and the execution, this all cost money and required sophisticated skills. Security analysts and intelligence sources say this may not have been carried out by one group alone. They do not rule out, they say, the involvement of a state in helping organize this. Sheila McVicker, CNN, London.
U.S. officials now saying that military reserve troops could be called up to help assist with the response to the national emergency. For more on how the Pentagon is responding, let's go there, where CNN's Mark Potter is standing by. Mark.
Hello, Jim. Pentagon sources say that President Bush is considering
calling up as many as 50,000 military reservists to help in the disaster relief effort and to provide relief also for National Guard pilots who have been flying combat air missions, air patrols rather, around the country. Pentagon official cautioned tonight, though, that this should not be seen by the public as any sort of indication that a military intervention, a military action is imminent. Now, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said that U.S. military pilots continue to fly those combat air patrols in the Washington, D.C., New York City corridor, and that pilots are on standby in what they call a 15-minute strip alert at 26 bases around the country. On CNN's Larry King Live, the Secretary said that any U.S. military response would be long-range and should not be seen as mere retaliation.
I don't think of it as retaliation. I don't think of it as punishment. I think of it as self-defense. The United States of America has every right to defend itself, and that is what it is about. It is consciously saying that countries and entities and people who actively oppose the United States and damage our interests by acts of violence, acts of war, are our enemies. And they are people and organizations and entities and states that we have every right to defend ourselves against.
Now, here at the Pentagon, officials estimate that the death toll here in this building is approximately 190 people. Those killed, that includes those killed aboard the plane, and those killed in the building mostly come from the Army and the Navy and from the civilian worker corps associated with the Army and the Navy. About 70 bodies have been recovered here so far. As of late this afternoon, about half of them had been driven over to the Dover Air Force Base mortuary in Delaware. Now, the recovery effort was interrupted temporarily tonight because of a fire that broke out here in the building. It flared up for a short while before firefighters, as you can see here, went to work and they were able to put that fire out fairly quickly. The fire in general in this building is under control, but there are still some hot spots that do flare up occasionally. 24 hours a day, workers are here. They're here at this hour, still going through the rubble, trying to shore up the building, looking for victims. This afternoon, the county fire chief said that officials thought that they had heard the pinging of a black box. But they were unable to locate it. We're looking at a live shot now of the building, and you can see that the fire is indeed out. But workers are still in there now looking for that black box. Investigators hope that by finding the cockpit voice recorder or the data recorder, they can put together some answers as to how this hijacking and the attack on this building occurred. Jim and Colleen, back to you.
All right, Mark Parter, thank you for that report. We want to now take a moment and bring you up to date on the most important news we're following right now, and that is, of course, is the investigation of Tuesday's attacks. Authorities have arrested at least 8 people at New York City's 2 major airports amid concerns over the threat of another hijacking. Authorities say that 4 of the arrested were seen at one of the airports the day of the attacks. Law enforcement sources tell CNN the 4 fled as they were challenged at the ticket counter. Police say they took the suspects into custody on Thursday for carrying forged documents that included a counterfeit pilot's license. Now, that comes as rescuers are working around the clock, hoping to find survivors of the attack at the World Trade Center. But officials say hopes are fading fast. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani saying around 4,700 people are still missing. U.S. President George W. Bush visits New York City on Friday. In an emotional appeal, Mr. Bush vowed Thursday that Washington will not relent until all of those connected to these attacks are held accountable.
All right, more now on that investigation for you. We are joined from Memphis by a man who knows how investigations like the one being carried out in the United States are actually conducted. Weldon Kennedy is a former deputy director of the FBI. Mr. Kennedy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Colleen.
Officials telling us now that the 18 people, the 18 hijackers, have actually been identified. So in terms of the investigation, what step would be next?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What step would be next in terms of the investigation once those people have been identified?
Obviously, these 18 had to have a support mechanism. Where did they stay? How did they get their money? What kind of banking did they do? Who supported them and assisted them in obtaining any kind of identification that they may have used? The list could almost be endless. Because they were in the country evidently for quite some period of time. We know for a fact that they were down in Florida, at least 2 or 3 of them, taking flying lessons, among other things. So it's a very, very large number of investigative leads that need to be followed up. And as each lead is followed up, it will generate additional leads. So it's sort of like a progressive growth. One lead leads to 2 leads, leads to 6, to 8, to 20, and it goes on.
Well, and Mr. Kennedy, I mean, does the fact that because this was such a sophisticated operation and people were in the country for a long period of time, as you point out, does that make it easier for investigators or harder in that they have this volume of material to deal with?
Well, it makes it easier in some ways because, again, everything that they did in terms of a rather lengthy period of time in terms of communications, banking, where they lived, what kind of licenses they had, and so forth, they have created a rather significant trail that now the investigators must uncover and develop all of the information. It makes it, of course, a huge amount of information that has to be developed concerning their activities, but it is a very rich field that the investigators are going to be able to work.
You know, how do investigators get information from people? I mean, today we're hearing about other people arrested at other airports who may or may not be connected with this.
I have a little bit of concern about some of those reports I'm hearing. I know that in Oklahoma City, for example, in the first 5 or 6 days following the Oklahoma City bombing, particularly after we released the drawings of the unknown subjects, we received all kinds of reports all over the nation, and in fact, many individuals were in fact taken into custody by law enforcement authorities who thought they were in fact taking into custody an unknown subject when that proved not to be the case, not to be true.
Mr. Kennedy, what if this ends up involving more than one group? What if there turns out to be a state behind it? How does that complicate things for investigators?
Well, obviously it means that there's going to be a significant international portion added to this case. At this point, there's a huge amount of domestic investigation going on in the United States. Obviously, and it's already become somewhat international. I'm hearing about investigation in Germany, and obviously as this case expands, there may very well be many different countries wherein there will have to be investigative activity.
Yeah, the Philippines as well. Well then, Kennedy, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, the heightened security across the U.S. is having a ripple effect on transportation from neighboring countries as well. U.S. Customs and immigration officials have intensified their scrutiny of vehicles and of passengers who are trying to enter the United States. Cars and trucks at various entry ports from Canada are experiencing long waits, sometimes lasting as much as 12 hours. Ontario's Transportation Ministry urges motorists to postpone travel to the United States. There have also been delays along the border with Mexico.
Well, meantime, air transport gradually being restored after Tuesday's ban on all commercial flights in U.S. airspace. Many airports and airlines resuming operations on a limited basis on Thursday, with travelers facing strict new security measures. Most airlines limited their flights to completion of those that were diverted after Tuesday's attacks. New York's 3 major airports opened briefly, but then were shut down after the FBI detained one person at Kennedy International Airport. Authorities say he tried to pass through security with false documents identifying him as a pilot. Well, Frank Buckley has been monitoring the situation at Los Angeles Airport. He's joining us from there now live. Frank?
Jim, LAX did reopen today, but with a very limited schedule. On an average day here, you have some 2,100 flights today. Airport officials tell me there were less than 100 flights going in or out of Los Angeles. Still, there are some flights, and even at this hour here in Terminal 4, at American Airlines, there are people attempting to go home, many of these people having to spend the past few difficult days away from loved ones. But this morning, the first of the arriving passengers into Los Angeles came here aboard an Alitalia flight. It had been diverted to Canada on Tuesday. Today, it finally arrived in LA, bringing with it reunions, families together again. CNN's Chris Burns has more.
Sighs and cries of relief that loved ones on an Alitalia flight from Milan to Los Angeles during the terror attacks weren't hijacked themselves. They were diverted to Calgary, Canada. Nunzia Bologna stayed calm, but her sister on the ground was terrified.
But we was scared when we heard the news. So thank you, God, everything is okay now.
The plane finally made it to Los Angeles International Airport Thursday, the first passenger flight here since the terror attacks. On Tuesday's flight, the passengers only knew they were being diverted until one of them called an operator on her cell phone. Her parents didn't know she switched to a direct flight from a stopover in New York.
They were more hysterical because they didn't hear anything until 2 o'clock in the afternoon and they thought I was dead.
Passengers say the final trip home from Canada started about midnight, hours waiting to take off after lining up for hours of searches.
Through the handbags, and they were like every small things they were questioning, and they were looking for some weapons, I guess.
Squeezing out toothpaste tubes, things like that?
Everything, even cameras, even everything with battery operated.
And back live here in Los Angeles, where the passengers are awaiting their flights wherever they can go this evening. Airport officials are hopeful that they will be able to increase the schedule tomorrow, but passengers everywhere are being warned to come early. Here in Los Angeles, domestic passengers are being told to come 2.5 hours early for their flights, 3.5 hours early for international flights. We can tell you that curbside check-in is a thing of the past, at least for the moment. Here in Los Angeles, people are not even allowed to drive their personal vehicles up to the curbs. They have to take shuttles to come in to the airport terminal area. We can also tell you that security is far more visible than it usually is, and also far less tolerant. There's one incident here in Terminal 4, for example, tonight, in which there was an unattended suitcase that was unattended just for a few moments. In a few moments' time, FBI agents and police officers surrounded that bag, and then a passenger sheepishly approached and said, "That's mine." She was thoroughly checked out, her identification was checked, and she was finally allowed to go on. But that's how tight the security is at this airport and how it will be at other airports across the U.S. Jim, back to you.
All right, Frank Buckley reporting there from Los Angeles International, where the security is tight. The lines are moving. Colleen?
All right, Jim, thanks. Well, on Wednesday, we brought you the story of Morgan Stanley and what officials there call the miraculous escape of the vast majority of that firm's employees from the World Trade Center. But now, sadly, we have to bring you the story of another firm that was not so lucky. CNN's Peter Viles has that.
It is the saddest vigil you can imagine. Scott Hazelcorn's parents.
It's not even revenge. I mean, I just want to hear my son's voice.
Members of Jun Koo Kang's church.
We all pray every night.
John Perconti's wife, expecting their child in December.
He called me at 10 to 9 and said, "Our building has just been hit by a plane, turn on the news." And I changed the channel and I saw what happened. And I said, "Oh God, John, please get out of there safely." And he said, "I love you, I have to go."
What links these stories is that all the missing worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, all above the 100th floor of the North Tower, the first one hit. Cantor is not a glamorous firm, but it is crucial, one of the world's largest bond trading firms. 1,000 people worked up there, fewer than 300 are accounted for, but it is not clear any of those now safe were on the top floors Tuesday morning.
I don't think anybody got out at this point, but we pray for miracles.
Scott Hazelcorn's parents suspect that their son did not run for his life.
He didn't care about himself. He only cared about his friends.
If Scott was there and he was getting out, he'd probably help everybody up in front of him. That's the kind of kid he was.
They gather at a city-designated center for relatives of the missing on 26th Street, where trees have become pleas for help. And further uptown at the Pierre Hotel, a gathering site for Cantor Fitzgerald families.
I don't think the company has the information that we need. I think they're sharing everything they know, but we have not heard of one survivor. We've not been able to validate any stories that we've heard.
There are official clearinghouses for information on the missing, and Cantor Fitzgerald is using them. But these friends and family members are convinced that any extra effort they can make on behalf of their loved ones is worth making. Peter Weil, CNN Financial News, New York.
You know, difficult enough for families in the United States, but imagine being a world away, really, in Europe. Lots of people have relatives who worked at the World Trade Center and don't have information at this time. Monitoring the situation in London, we turn to Richard Quest for an update on the markets and also this part of the story. Richard, lots of people still need information about their loved ones.
Oh, there's no question, Colleen, that the large number of people, I mean, the Foreign Secretary, the British Foreign Secretary, speaking yesterday, said that it was known that at least 100 people, British people, had perished in what happened in New York, and he said that there would be numbers could rise much higher, possibly into the middle hundreds, and that's one reason why the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, has recalled Parliament. That parliamentary session will take place later on Friday. Now, even though it has been 3 days since Wall Street last did business, in Asia and Europe there has been trading in the financial markets. Of course, without New York's guidance, it's been a very different sort of trading session. In Asia right now, the Nikkei average is up around 1%. In Hong Kong, the index is down roughly 0.5%. The Singapore Straits Times, which seems to be suffering the worst of the losses this Friday, is down 3%. The currency markets are very quiet indeed. The dollar is steady. It's 119 against the yen. It's at around 90 to the euro. The European Central Bank, as expected, left interest rates unchanged on Thursday. Just talking about those dollar rates for 1 second, it's been made quite clear that actual trading levels, the so-called foreign exchange markets, are very, very quiet. In some cases, only 50% of normal trade is taking place because, of course, of the absence of the New York markets. Turning to the United States, the Chicago bond market reopened on Thursday in a shortened session when the price of Treasury bonds jumped. But Monday, of course, is the big day. That's when US stock markets are due to reopen after an unprecedented 4-day closure. The US Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill has continued to try and build confidence by investors in the US economy. He said the tragedy saw no reason to lose faith.
We have every reason to maintain our confidence in the US economy. No evil, no matter how unspeakable, can destroy America's productive spirit. If anything, this evil act strengthens our resolve to be the most free, the most vibrant economy in the world.
And finally, just before I leave you, one point that they have actually been saying, perhaps the best quote, Jim, that I've seen overnight from Asia, is a trader in Hong Kong who said when it comes to speculative trading, the markets do have morals, and we're not taking advantage of anything that may have happened in the United States. That's the way the financial world looks at this hour. Jim?
All right. Thanks very much, Richard. We'll toss it over to Jim now.
Okay, well, we want to go back to New York City. It's been the end of another day of struggle for many people as they try to dig through the wreckage of the World Trade Center and the buildings surrounding that complex, trying to find someone still alive. Garrick Utley is looking at that situation and much more. Garrick?
And Jim, we're looking at it from a different perspective. Inside, the forecasted rain, thunder showers, and lightning, above all, are moving in fast on Midtown Manhattan. So we decided it was a better part of valor to be cautious and move off the roof of our CNN bureau here in New York inside. As you've been mentioning, we've been reporting too, President Bush comes to New York tomorrow. A presidential visit has always caused a consternation because traffic is being tied up. Bill Clinton, when he was president, came frequently to this town, and half of Manhattan would be nearly paralyzed during those visits. But today, Bill Clinton, because he lives just north of the city, has his office in Harlem, as we all know, was able to drive south into Manhattan to visit with some of the people who are out there looking for their loved ones, their friends and family, still holding on to hope that they may be alive, even though that hope has to dim with each passing day. Here are some scenes and some of the sounds as the former president talked with people.
I have two children in the military. He's their dad. He was in on the first and 12th floor, first thing the other morning. This boy's down in California, and we need to know where he is. This touches so much.
They're still fighting people. Don't lose hope.
Thank you very much.
This lady came up to me and she said, "This is my husband. He's missing. He was in the Marine Corps, and two of our sons, are in the military. You commanded them, and I want my husband back."
President, can you please ask everybody to just tell us, give us a lead, let us know where him and his co-workers may be. If you were president, what you would do now?
The important thing is that I'm not president. I'm a citizen, and I'm going to support the president. That's what I want every American to do. They know what they have to do. They have to find the facts, and they have to take appropriate action. And I can tell you this, having been there, it may or may not be simple, easy, and quick.
Former President Bill Clinton today in those moving scenes here in Manhattan. It was taking place at an armory in New York City, which is being used as a meeting place, bringing people together with their searches, with their very human stories. You might wonder, well, how many stories are there out there like this? We can put a number on it, more or less, at least 4,760 of those stories. That's the number of missing that the city officials have put for those believed to have been lost or buried under the rubble of the World Trade Center. Jody Ross of CNN has been bearing witness to what has been happening there. She's over there at the armory, and she's going to check in with us right now and give us the latest. Jody?
Hi, Garrick. The feeling here tonight, the mood here tonight, of course, somber and quiet. There were hundreds, maybe thousands of people here earlier looking for family members, friends, and loved ones. The weather is menacing here. It feels like it's about to rain, but that doesn't stop people from coming. Not even just people looking for missing people, but actually people trying to help out. We've seen shirts being handed out, food passed around. It seems like everybody sort of wants to get into the spirit, wants to help as much as they can. It's harder to stay home and do nothing, they say, than not come out here and try to do something. As we talk to people tonight, there's a feeling of hope. They believe that their family, friends, and loved ones are missing. They continue to put up signs and posters. All around me here, people have posted pictures, information about the person that's missing, statistics, the last time that person was seen, where in the World Trade Center they worked, what floor they were on, all the details that they can give. You can also do that over at the armory behind me. That's open 24 hours. They're encouraging people to show up there, register the name of the missing person, and give all the information they can. So hopefully people will continue to do that through the night in spite of the rain that's beginning to fall. Back to you, Garrick.
Thank you very much, Jody. It is sort of interesting that in what is now being called a war against terrorism, that very human meeting place in Midtown Manhattan is an armory. Let's go back now to Jim and Colleen in Atlanta.
Thank you, Garrick.
All right, thank you, Garrick. And we're going to get back to Garrick a little bit later, but right now we're going to close out this hour. We're going to take you out to Los Angeles, where Paul Verkaman is standing by as people there get together to do what they can, to have unity, to have courage, and to face the reality that people have got to face in the wake of this tragedy.
What happened here tonight was raw emotion poured into the Hollywood Bowl as Wynton Marsalis and his jazz orchestra combined with the LA Philharmonic, and Wynton played a very uplifting piece that said was extremely appropriate for these tragic times.
We're from New York, and we, of course, are deeply touched and saddened, but we want to say that
Our music is about the blues, and it's ultimately about swinging, and it's about drawing joy out of tragedy and refusing to be beat down. We cannot be beaten down. Thank you.
And many of the concert goers here said that they thought they needed to get out of the house and get together and be among friends.
I think it's important for people to be together. I think that being together, people can express their feelings, and we all know what's going on, and I think things should go on reasonably normally.
And we close here by giving you a rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner that was performed by the LA Philharmonic and Wynton Marsalis, and many people here said they felt an urge to sing along.
Surveying the wreckage as New Yorkers struggle to pick up the pieces, President Bush vows to whip terrorism.
This is a terrible moment. But this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
And photographs are all that remain for many families who still hope that somehow their loved ones survived. I'm Colleen McEdwards.
And I'm Jim Clancy. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America Under Attack.
We want to begin right now with a new development in this ongoing investigation of the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. Philippine President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo says the Philippines and the United States have conducted a joint raid. Here we are in connection with the investigation. Mrs. Arroyo says the raid took place at the Bayview Hotel in Manila on Wednesday. That was one day after the attacks in the United States. The hotel is located near the U.S. Embassy. No word yet on whether anyone was detained. Well, heightened security at New York City's major airports has resulted in at least 8 arrests. CNN's Mike Betcher is following that story and has more.
One of those people arrested was at Kennedy Airport. He was carrying a fake pilot's ID. He was arrested and taken away for questioning. Also at Kennedy Airport, there were another 4 or 5 people who had either false documentation or were in the country illegally who were also arrested and taken away for questioning. At New York's LaGuardia Airport, police detained at least 2 other men for questioning. After the spate of arrests and detentions, all New York area airports were closed again. A few other airports in the U.S. have also shut down once more because of security concerns. Attorney General John Ashcroft said FBI agents are making progress in their investigation, adding that they have identified the hijackers aboard all 4 ill-fated jets.
The total number of hijackers, to our best estimate and our best knowledge, given the information at this time, on the 4 planes that crashed was at least 18.
4,000 FBI agents have fanned out across the country, knocking on hundreds of doors. But before this is closed, and over, they're going to have to knock on tens of thousands more doors.
All right, Mike Betcher, thanks. In New York, they're bleary-eyed from grief, but still clutching to hope. Hundreds of friends and family members of those missing from the collapse of the World Trade Center have been lining the streets of Manhattan. They're giving authorities any information that they can, from dental records to photos, anything that might help locate or identify their loved ones. But as the minutes become hours, the hours become days. Many people say their hopes are turning to fears for the worst. Rescuers have been battling into the night in a tireless effort to try to locate anyone who might still be alive. But despite their best efforts, no survivors were found in the rubble on Thursday. New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani says that more than 4,700 people are still missing. Jim.
The mayor of New York also urging the people of his city to be patient as the painstaking rescue and recovery effort really pushes ahead. CNN's Garrick Utley has been monitoring the situation in New York. He joins us now once again live. Hello, Garrick.
Yes, Jim, and as we've been saying really for the past couple of days, one of the interesting aspects of the human dynamics here, the communication between officialdom and people who are still waiting for news about their friends and family who may have been lost at the Trade Center, is how the officials, starting right with Mayor Giuliani, are not offering or holding out undue hope. They are not really going any further beyond precisely what they know. They put the figure out, 4,600, 4,700 people believed to be missing, and the subtext of that is that the fear is that they probably have been lost, with perhaps 1 or 2 miraculous exceptions who will be found. So there is sort of a waiting process going on here. Now, you can call that grieving. You can call that just holding out hope day after day. Whatever you want to call it, it has a very human face. And our Jody Ross, who's over at the Armory where people have been gathering, has some examples of those hopes and how they continue to burn bright. Jody?
Yeah, Garrick, I think I would call it hope out here. This is becoming an all too familiar sight here in New York City and probably now all over the world. Pictures, posters, signs about missing people, men and women who haven't been seen since the terrorist attack on Tuesday. This picture belongs to this family here with me. You guys tell me about Moira.
This is my Aunt Moira Smith. She's a NYPD police officer, currently the only female police officer that's missing in this terrible tragedy. She was one of the first ones to see the first plane hit the building. She called it in right away, and she was last seen in the second tower on the first or second floor at 9:30 on Tuesday, and she was helping people. And that's all she really wants to do, is help people. And if you have any information, if you've seen her, or you can give us any information whatsoever, we're desperate here. Just call the 13th precinct. That's who she's with. And
Mercedes, tell me, has there been any information, any leads, any news about her?
As Allison said, the last news we got is that a detective saw her in Tower 2 on the second or first floor around 9:30 yesterday, and he said she was just doing a remarkable job, pulling people out, helping people, comforting people, and she's dedicated to the people in New York and to her fellow officers, and she's just, she's just a remarkable person, and we know everyone is doing everything they can, but just if anyone has seen her, we're trying to find. We're not going to leave any rock unturned. We're going to find her. We're hopeful. We're prayerful. We're praying for Moira, and we're praying for all the rescue workers, and, I don't know, she's just a remarkable person, and we know she's coming home. We're just trying to make it happen quicker, and
is that your feeling? You feel like she's out there and just needs to be found?
Absolutely.
Allison, you mentioned that you're having trouble sleeping, and it's hard to have a normal life right now.
Well, absolutely. I think everyone, no one is unaffected by this. I mean, everyone I know knows someone who's been affected by this, and we're all praying, and I just hope everyone out there is praying for everyone in the world right now.
I think that is the case. Did you want to say something?
I brought this picture. This picture was taken in July 6th at my brother's wedding, and this is Moira and her husband Jim, who's also a police officer, and her baby Patricia Mary, who's 2 years old. So I know, as I just said, everybody's doing everything they can, but if people need encouragement to keep looking, think of Patricia Mary. This is her face right here, and help us bring her mother home. She's 2 years old.
And the first New York female police officer so far missing in action.
That's the report we got. That's the information we were told. So, and the New York police have been unbelievably supportive of our family. We can't thank them enough. Good, so.
Good luck to you. Okay, thank you very much. Well, that's the feeling here. We meet so many people like this, so many stories. They get to sort of tell their stories behind me at the Armory, which is open 24 hours. It's raining now. I don't think that's going to deter anybody from coming down here and doing what they can to help, because it's impossible, New Yorkers tell me, to sit at home and do nothing. They have to do something, whether they're here providing food, providing support, providing comfort, or they're here to actually find people that are missing. Whatever the case, New Yorkers are out in full force tonight, in spite of the weather. Garrett, back to you.
Thank you very much, Jody. We're hearing those very personal stories, and of course, there are stories which are tragedy, and there are too many of them in New York and in the Pentagon in that area because of the tragedy there and the plane that was lost over Pennsylvania. But stories also have contrast. There are two sides of what are going on, or two parts, and we're seeing that this day, both on Thursday and today, Friday, and for days to come in Manhattan and New York City, because the city is coming back to life. There are the people gathering at the Armory and trying to find out what's happened to their friends and family. But at the very same time, schools were open, most businesses were open, and tonight on Broadway, the lights went back on, as they say. The Broadway theaters started up again. The show is going on. The lights are bright in Times Square. Times Square is filled with more and more people after these past 3 nights of almost total emptiness and eerie silence. So these are the dual channels of human life, of narrative, if you will, which we're hearing these days. And we want to hear another example of that from one of our reporters, Maria Hinojosa, who visited some people who are also still holding out hope.
Just 7 weeks ago, Ann McGovern posed with her new grandson minutes after he was born.
I've never seen her look so happy as when he was born. She was there. She was so excited.
But now her daughter Terry wants that smiling picture on television. Her mother worked on one of the top floors of the World Trade Center. Her daughter wonders if anyone has seen her alive.
We were interviewed by police detectives, and we had filled out a questionnaire, and it was really like, what jewelry would she have been wearing? Do you know what she had on? Did she have any identifying body marks?
Her sister Liz worked in the World Financial Center across the street, but managed to escape. She was supposed to meet her mother that day for lunch.
I was just about to call her, and I can't believe it. I don't think it's set in yet. I just feel so powerless, and I wish I could have done something.
That same awful feeling consumed an emergency center on Lexington Avenue, where authorities are compiling a list of the missing. It's become a place of public grieving and a place to hope for miracles.
He was on 104th floor, Cantor Fitzgerald. We've gone to hospitals. We've called every hotline. They don't know where we can't find him. He's not on any list. So.
Hope is the word, the emotion that keeps these people going. But that hope hits hard against the reality that thousands of body bags have already arrived into New York City.
Triage centers remain relatively quiet. The one at Stuyvesant
At a center for Mexican immigrants, 15 friends are confirmed dead so far. Radios are kept on in hopes there'll be word of hundreds of others, immigrants from Mexico who labored in the Twin Towers, hoping to make a better life.
In my heart, I feel that I'm crying.
But there is not much concrete news for these people today, just fears for the worst.
My mother was so excited that my son was born. She was there at the birth 7 weeks ago, and he's not going to know her.
And so there's resignation. Maria Hinojosa, CNN, New York.
Just one more example, or several examples of the scars left by what happened here last Tuesday. Jim?
Well, let's face it, there are people down there around where the World Trade Center used to be this night, risking their lives, trying to recover people alive, trying to recover bodies, trying to perhaps bring some hope to all of those thousands of people that we've seen here in the last few minutes waiting to find something about their loved ones. But now there's also a rainstorm moving in. What kind of a threat is that going to pose to the rescue workers with all of that dust in the area?
Well, one of the good strokes of fortune these past several days has been the beautiful, excellent weather amid this tragedy. But you're right, the storm is moving in. Even inside here, we can hear the thunder outside. And you're going to get some pictures, I think, showing some of the lightning which has been striking around Manhattan. Obviously, if it's a severe thunderstorm, a downpour, that may stop things or slow work down for a little bit. But if it's and that thunderstorm may well move on. But if there is a steady rain, which sometimes sort of descends and stays over Manhattan, well, what the heck? People have slickers, ponchos, the work goes on. As one person was saying, if we really get into rain, we have to remember one thing. We're supposed to be in a war against terrorism right now, the president says, and wars never call time out on account of rain. And I think that's the attitude you'll find in lower Manhattan as this bad weather moves in and continues.
All right, Garrick Utley there, reporting once again. We're going to come back and visit with Garrick again. Colleen?
All right, the weather obviously a concern, but a steady stream of evacuations, bomb threats, and arrests is also keeping the nation on edge. Vice President Dick Cheney has been separated from the president as a precaution, and the White House apparently has some renewed security concerns. President Bush, meanwhile, is preparing for his first trip to New York since the attacks. With more on all of this, we go to Major Garrett. Major, what are those security concerns?
Well, Colleen, before I summarize the security concerns, let's cover some breaking news. CNN has confirmed that the White House and Congress have reached a deal for $40 billion of emergency aid for New York and for Virginia and for the prosecution of what Mr. Bush has called the first war of the 21st century, a war against global terrorism. That deal was reached moments ago between White House negotiators, senior members of the Democratic and Republican leadership from the House and the Senate. Sources tell CNN that $40 billion emergency supplemental spending bill will be on the floor of the House of Representatives sometime later on today, Friday afternoon, maybe into the Friday evening. The Senate is expected to then pass it soon thereafter. This legislation should be prepared for the president's signature no later than Saturday. Also on Saturday, there should be considerable debate on Capitol Hill and passage of a use of force resolution authorizing the president to prosecute that war against global terrorism. But to repeat, CNN has confirmed a deal between White House and senior congressional negotiators over a supplemental emergency spending bill of $40 billion, $20 billion of that set aside for immediate cleanup, rescue, recovery efforts in Virginia at the Pentagon and in downtown New York at the site of the World Trade Center catastrophe, and then $20 billion for beefed up counterterrorism activities, and also potentially to carry out any activities or any raids, military or otherwise, against those thought responsible for the terrorist attacks here in the United States. As for the President's Day on Thursday, it was very busy indeed on several fronts, not only working with Congress on this supplemental bill and a use of force resolution, but also dealing with the symbolism of healing. The President and the First Lady, Laura Bush, went to the George Washington Hospital Center to visit and commiserate with those recovering from their injuries of the plane crashing into the Pentagon on Tuesday, also talking to some of the rescue workers, responding as the President and the First Lady often must do in situations like this, setting a note of sympathy and extended their heartfelt congratulations to some of those who helped rescue those and sympathy to those who are recovering from their injuries. Also, the President, by phone, spoke to those who have been on the front line in New York. Governor George Pataki, the Republican governor of New York, and the Republican mayor of New York City, Rudolph Giuliani. From the Oval Office, President Bush talked to both of them, thanking them for all of their efforts in New York to rally firefighters, police officers, volunteers, rescue efforts, and all the work, the massive work that's going on in New York City to deal with the tragedy, the catastrophe there.
People of New York City and
after concluding his telephone conversation with those two leaders in New York, the President took a few questions, and as the reporters asked him about the gravity of this situation, he said the country must be prepared to fight the first war of the 21st century.
Through the tears of sadness, I see an opportunity. You know, make no mistake about it, this nation is sad. But we're also tough and resolute. And now's an opportunity to do generations a favor by coming together and whipping terrorism, hunting it down, finding it, and holding them accountable. The nation must understand this is now the focus of my administration.
Senior administration officials tell CNN it was a very important note the president wanted to strike in that response, feeling that there was a pervasive sense in the country that this nation will never, ever be the same. And what the president wanted to do in those remarks is say, well, that very well may be true, but it doesn't mean we will not be the same and all of the changes will be negative. Perhaps, just perhaps, this country can, in fact, wage a war that the world will join it in waging that will change the world for the better, stressing the opportunity, perhaps, to do generations of Americans yet unborn a good service by dealing with terrorism, combating it, and hopefully rooting it out. That was definitely a note the president wanted to strike. Yet many other notes struck by the administration today, one by the First Lady Laura Bush, speaking for many Americans and trying to, in some ways, describe the scope of the tragedy.
I was not frightened for myself. I was, like every American, concerned about everyone who was in the World Trade Center, and also so unbelievably saddened that something like this would happen in our country, and that the disregard for life of the people who did this was so profound that they would harm people who were going about their daily lives. And, it's a terrible, terrible tragedy.
Of course, White House staff is trying to also go about its daily lives, but that's much more difficult now than it was on Monday. The security perimeter around the White House was extended this afternoon by the Secret Service, extended by several blocks. And throughout the afternoon and this evening, there have been innumerable false alarms, even as I speak to you now, Colleen. In the early morning darkness here in Washington, D.C., a search helicopter hovers over the White House, its searchlight piercing the early morning darkness. It is a sight and a sound I've never felt or seen before here in the nation's capital. Colleen?
Major Garrett, thanks very much. Jim?
Well, let's go across the Potomac River to the Pentagon, where just a little while ago flames briefly flared again from the wreckage there. Mark Potter joins us now live. Mark?
Hi, Jim. You're right to characterize it as briefly. There was a little bit of fire for a while, but it was quickly put out. Now, the big news here at the Pentagon tonight is that sources say a decision has not been made yet, but that President Bush is considering activating as many as 50,000 military reservists to help with the disaster recovery efforts and to relieve National Guard pilots who have been standing by or flying combat air patrols around the country. Meanwhile, here at the building tonight, as you can see here, workers continue to work in the rubble under very bright spotlights, looking for bodies and for the so-called black boxes from the American Airlines 757 that crashed here Tuesday. Now, earlier today, the county fire chief said officials thought they heard pinging sound from one of the boxes, either the voice recorder or the data recorder, but says that officials looked around in the area and so far have been unable to find anything. At a news briefing, the Deputy Secretary of Defense said that whenever the U.S. decides to respond to the recent terrorist attacks, it will be long-term and widespread.
I think one thing is clear is that you don't do it with just a single military strike, no matter how dramatic. You don't do it with just military forces alone. You do it with the full resources of the U.S. government. It will be a campaign, not a single action. And we're going to keep after these people and the people who support them until this stops.
Now, meanwhile, back here at the Pentagon, officials now estimate that around 190 people died in the attack here on the building. That includes the 64 who were aboard the plane. One of the survivors of the attack, a Navy lieutenant, talked with us today and said right after the plane crashed into the building, everyone rallied to help the injured.
It was actually very calm. Everybody was looking out for everybody else, different services, Army, Navy, Air Force. Everybody was working together to, make sure you need help. And a lot of the civilians were, it seemed like a lot more of the civilians were injured than the military, and everybody was rushing to everybody's aid. help out.
Now, as of late this afternoon, officials say about 70 bodies had been recovered from the building. They are being taken to the Dover Air Force Base mortuary in Delaware. And for those people who have been looking up into the skies, seeing combat aircraft flying overhead, the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, said that combat air patrols are still being flown in the Washington, D.C., New York City corridor, and that fighter pilots are on a 15-minute standby at 26 military bases around the country. And as we leave you, here's another view of the building tonight. Things seem quiet here, but workers are working in the rubble 24 hours a day, sifting through the debris, looking for bodies, looking for the black boxes, shoring up the building so that they can get farther into the rubble to look for the rest of the victims. They do not expect to find any more survivors here. Jim and Colleen, back to you.
All right. Mark Parda, thank you for that report. Well, as the victims' families try to come to terms with devastating pain, many are telling chilling tales of their loved ones' final moments. We spoke to Deborah Burlingame. Her brother was the pilot of the hijacked aircraft that slammed into the Pentagon.
I used to be a flight attendant many, many years ago, so in addition to my brother, we really feel a connection with airline people and have a lot of airline friends, apart from my brother. And so we're devastated to see these scenes like this, and this is just an extraordinary scene. So I didn't know what he was saying. He was screaming, and then I caught the word chick. It's chick. And there's no words to describe. You know, you hear crime victims' families being told, this is a murder scene. This is a mass murder.
Captain Charles Burlingame was one of the 64 passengers and crew on board that Los Angeles-bound flight.
Well, President Bush and his senior aides have left the world in no doubt that they consider Tuesday's terrorist attacks on New York and Washington acts of war. U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell says careful consideration is being given to an appropriate response.
So you have to consider you're dealing with a very, very skilled, knowledgeable, thinking enemy. And we just have to think better than them, think faster than them, and be cleverer than them in order to respond in a sensible way with all of the weapons at our disposal. And one of those weapons is military force used in an appropriate way. It's not so much the size of whatever military response you might have, but does it do the job? Does it get to the heart of the problem?
All right, and you heard earlier that President Bush calling these terrorist strikes the first war of the 21st century. So as Washington studies a range of military options to take against those responsible for the attack, U.S. troop strength already is on the rise at an overseas airbase that could play a strategic role. Jane Araf reports now from the predominantly Muslim country, Turkey.
This is one of the biggest U.S. air bases in the region. On Turkish territory leased by the U.S., it is, Turkish military sources here say, gearing up for a possible military strike. They say in the past 2 days, the U.S. has sent in more personnel, adding to the 7,000 troops it already has in southeastern Turkey. Movements in the town surrounding the base have been restricted. U.S. military officials won't comment on the new measures. Since the end of the Gulf War, U.S. planes have taken off from Incirlik to patrol and sometimes bomb northern Iraq, though the economy of southeastern Turkey relies on trade from Iraq. Also neighbor to Iran and Syria, Muslim Turkey is making clear its loyalties lie with the U.S.
I don't specify any country in our struggle against terrorism, and we will certainly support fully the Article 5 of NATO.
That article, invoked by NATO for the first time, treats the attack on the United States as an attack on all NATO members. Turkey's prime minister says that means Turkey would allow Incirlik to be used to strike whoever was behind the U.S. attack. There was military and emotional support here, as throughout Ankara Thursday, the Turkish Star and Crescent, the symbol of Islam, flew at half-staff alongside the Stars and Stripes in mourning for the dead. But in this country, a NATO member and a Muslim ally of the United States, the shockwaves are still being felt. Turkey's economy also staggered under the tragedy. Already in crisis, the Turkish lira fell further.
We have realized that we will be faced with additional economic problems while trying to deal with the economic crisis. We know that it's a global problem also.
Tourism was hit as cruise ships stopping in Istanbul kept their passengers on board. Like Americans around the globe, those here were told by their embassy to keep a low profile. Jane Araf, CNN, Ankara.
Well, searchers have found the flight data recorder from the plane that crashed in western Pennsylvania on Tuesday morning. The data recorder from United Airlines Flight 93 was found in the crater caused by the plane when it crashed there. The passenger jet was en route to San Francisco from Newark when it was taken over by hijackers and rerouted. The passengers apparently tried to wrest control from the hijackers, causing the plane to crash before it reached whatever target the hijackers were aiming for. The flight's cockpit voice recorder, though, has not been found. Still searches going on for that.
All right, well, last December, a pilot instructor in Florida gave flying lessons to two men who claimed to be student pilots from the Middle East.
That's right. They're now suspects in Tuesday's attacks, and they may have flown two of the hijacked planes. John Zarella investigates how they managed to pull this off.
Unfortunately, sadly enough,
Henry George feels pain, extreme frustration, and great regret.
I don't want to believe that what I did made him successful.
Last December 29th and 30th at his Opelika Flight Training School, George gave two Middle Eastern men some basic lessons in a simulator on how to fly a jet aircraft. The two men were Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shari. The FBI is now combing through apartments in South Florida, checking cars and mailboxes, all linked to Mohammed Atta. Law enforcement sources say Atta is a suspect in the attack, perhaps a pilot of one of the doomed jets. He was listed on the manifest of American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston. Marwan al-Shari, according to German authorities, was also aboard one of the hijacked planes. The story Atta and al-Shari gave their flight instructor was this.
They were on their way home, and they wanted the exposure to jet flying, or an introduction to jet flying, because they were hoping to get a job with their airline in their country.
George says they mentioned Egypt a couple of times, but generally during the 2 days, they didn't have much to say. No small talk.
They were low-key individuals, maybe even call them shy. There wasn't, they were not outspoken, opinionated type people.
In all, George says he spent 8 hours with the two men. They reserved their lessons with a credit card but paid in cash, $1,500. George says he wishes something about them had been suspicious.
He was using his own name. They provide you with credit card numbers. There was nothing that you would make you suspect that this individual was anything but above board.
George says they were just a couple of student pilots, and there was nothing special about their abilities.
What I can recollect from my memory is that we mostly did turns in a couple of approaches. I don't think we did any more than that.
What they didn't do, George says, was practice how to land. John Zarella, CNN, Miami.
Well, if there is U.S. military retaliation, one of the likely targets could be prime suspect Osama bin Laden. But experts say any operation against bin Laden, if there is one, could prove difficult.
Bin Laden, when I met with him, was surrounded by a group of at least a couple of dozen heavily armed men who are armed with RPGs and Russian submachine guns. They're highly motivated. They're prepared to die. And that was just in the course of just doing an interview. Obviously, bin Laden must be very concerned about his security right now, and he has hundreds of followers. who might be surrounding him. Also, any American military operation in Afghanistan would be conducted in some of the most inhospitable terrain in the world. It's a rocky, mountainous, desert region. It's an area with which bin Laden is very familiar and with which Americans aren't very familiar. The last time America had a presence in Afghanistan was in 1989. Since then, the embassy there has been closed. So the information the United States has about the country is second-hand and old.
And bin Laden is known to have all manner of hiding places. The Associated Press quotes Pakistani intelligence sources as saying that bin Laden moved to a new hiding place just minutes after the attacks in the United States. Jim?
As investigations press on, Saudi-born dissident Osama bin Laden is, of course, as we've said, top at the list of suspects. Chief international correspondent Christian Amanpour takes a closer look at bin Laden and the country where he's believed to have taken refuge.
When the Soviet Union invaded the treacherous and mountainous terrain of Afghanistan on the eve of the 1980s, it quickly found its own Vietnam. This superpower was taken on and eventually forced out by a network of Afghan guerrilla groups known as the Mujahideen. The Cold War was still on, and the United States helped recruit these resistance fighters through its allies in the region, allies like Pakistan, which borders Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden was one of those fighters, and after the war with the Soviets, he took control of the guerrilla network, which was swelled by fighters from all over the Islamic world.
Bin Laden's group grew out of the Mujahideen forces that were trained initially by the Pakistani intelligence services and the Pakistani military, and also, of course, funded by the United States.
But the United States is faulted for failing to track the growing ranks of radical Muslim guerrillas once the Soviet occupation ended. Afghanistan then descended into civil war and eventually split into two main blocs. On one side, the Northern Alliance, a loose network of ethnic minorities, nominally led by the charismatic Ahmad Shah Massoud, known as the Afghan mastermind of the Soviet defeat. He has not been seen since a bomb attack by assassins last week. On the other side, the Taliban, a fundamentalist Islamic movement representing the ethnic majority. They captured the capital, Kabul, in 1996 and are now in control of almost all Afghanistan. But their repressive regime, particularly their harsh treatment of women, have earned them almost universal condemnation. The West also accuses the Taliban of harboring Osama bin Laden, America's enemy number one. Pakistan is one of only 3 countries recognizing the Taliban as the legitimate government, and now it's under intense pressure from the United States to get the Taliban to give up bin Laden.
We regard terrorism as an evil that threatens the world community. Concerted international effort is needed to fight terrorism in all its forms and manifestations.
Experts point out the Taliban itself is divided between hardliners and some who would prefer more cooperation with the West. Some analysts believe the United States should now offer ultimatums and incentives to the Taliban to give up bin Laden, at least as a first measure before a military attack. Christiana Manpour, CNN, London.
Well, as Christiane just mentioned, Pakistan has been put in what you might call a unique position by this week's events. Islamabad has pledged to support the United States, but Washington wants proof. Tom Mantier has been monitoring the situation for us in Pakistan. He joins us now live with more. Tom, to what extent can cooperation from Pakistan be counted on?
Well, Colleen, that's a $64 million question right now. The U.S. State Department has heard the words. Now they want to see the deeds. They have heard the Pakistani president promise complete support, but they're also looking down below that first level of government into the military, into the security and intelligence apparatus. How much support, how much information are they going to get from them? The ISI, the Inter-Service Intelligence Operation here, indeed has a lot of information about bin Laden. As you heard earlier, the movement of bin Laden just after the attack on the United States to a new location. That came out of Pakistani intelligence sources. So the promises have been made. There have been requests by the U.S. government to the Pakistanis to hold up the supply of fuel into Afghanistan, to have bin Laden supporters suppressed in their movements in Pakistan. Basically, the United States is asking a lot, and we'll have to wait and see how much of what they're asking for is delivered. Now, if and when there is any type of military action, airstrikes, the Pakistani airspace would be important. It was closed this morning as the Pakistani military was using the skies. They grounded all civilian flights for several hours. People were stranded at airports all across Pakistan. I just saw about 10 minutes ago a large jetliner of leaving here in Islamabad, so the airspace is indeed open once again. And there are meetings going on within the government and within the military about what to do next, what steps to take to offer this cooperation that the Pakistani president has promised. Kali?
All right. CNN's Tom Matier, thanks very much. Jim?
All right, we want to bring you up to date now on some of the latest developments, beginning with the continued rescue operations in New York City. Workers there digging through the mammoth pile of rubble created by the collapse of the World Trade Center. They're hoping to find survivors, but with each passing hour, those hopes are fading. No new survivors were found on Thursday. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani says around 4,700 people are still missing. People all across the country are mourning and remembering the victims with candlelight vigils and special services. Friday has been designated as a national day of prayer and remembrance. Tensions remain high in New York City. Police received more than 90 false bomb threats by noon on Thursday. Also, authorities have arrested at least 8 people at the city's 2 major airports. Authorities say that 4 of those arrested were seen at one of the airports the day of the attacks. Law enforcement sources tell CNN the 4 fled as they were challenged at the ticket counter. For more now on the situation in New York, let's turn once again to CNN's Garrick Utley. Garrick.
Yes, Jim, and perhaps a footnote about this tragedy. The fact that New York one day would be the target of a terrorist attack was not really a surprise, although it was a surprise that it happened when it did on Tuesday morning. And what I mean by that is that for years, the city government here, led by New York City's various mayors, has known that terrorists would have it in for the United States, would look at New York, its landmarks, some of which now lie in rubble, as a promising and tantalizing target. So what they did is that they went ahead and built an emergency command operation or control center, a bunker, if you will, just in case the worst would happen. Well, the worst has happened now, and where did the city planners put that emergency control center? In the World Trade Center. How's that for planning? Fortunately, the senior officials, including Mayor Giuliani, were not there when those towers came down. And now, because they're down, the search continues, and Gary Tuckman is down in the area in Lower Manhattan, giving us the latest after quite a rainstorm swept through town. Gary?
Well, that's right, Garrick. It's now thundering, lightning, and just a short time ago, it started pouring, and that will not help the search effort one bit. Behind me, the ruins are still smoldering. It casts an eerie light in the rainy sky. That smoke has now been going for 2.5 days. There are workers out there 24 hours a day. The only time the emergency workers haven't been out there is when there have been evacuation orders, concerns over 3 buildings in the area, concerns they're structurally unsound and they could collapse on the workers. So they have had to evacuate them a few times, but otherwise they've been out there 24 hours a day. However, some of them have left now because about 5 minutes ago it was pouring very heavily like a monsoon. It's let up a little bit, so hopefully they will come back in a short time and continue their work looking for survivors. It's very hard for us to believe that those 110-story structures are gone. When you used to come down the street, whether you were driving or jogging, there's a beautiful path along the Hudson River here. You saw the 2 110-story towers. They were landmarks. They are now completely gone. It's hard to believe. But what's even harder to believe is the fact that there may be as many as 4,700 bodies in the rubble just a few blocks away from us. Now, some emergency officials are telling us that despite the fact that no survivors were found today, they are still hopeful that there are pockets there, pockets in which they will find people who are still alive, but it hasn't happened. There was an exciting moment today. Police officials and hospital officials told us that 5 firefighters were pulled out of the rubble alive after being there since these buildings collapsed. But it was because of confusion that it was reported like that. These fire officials were rescued, and rescue workers saw them and said this to the police and to the hospital officials. However, it turned out that these firemen got trapped today while they were participating in the rescue also. So they were rescued, and that's good news, but they weren't in there since Tuesday. Now, we've met up with many rescue workers throughout this endeavor over the last 2.5 days, and we've seen rescue workers for years covering disasters all over the country and all over the world. But what's different about this particular time is the fact that none of the people we've spoken with have ever seen anything like this before, the magnitude of this, and they tell us they hope never to see anything like this again. Garrick, back to you.
Thank you, Gary. Let's just take a moment. We've been talking about rescue workers in some generic way, but obviously they have all kinds of skills. Give us a sense for all of us as to who these people are. Some are firemen, perhaps. There must be, we heard there are people from Con Ed, the gas company, structural specialists. Who are these people?
That's right. You have people from all walks of life. First of all, you have New York City policemen and New York City firemen who are participating in it. And that's one of the reasons that we have so many firemen and policemen. Also Port Authority policemen. The Port Authority is the agency that owned the World Trade Center. That's one reason why so many of them are missing, because they were on the scene right away. But you also have people from other walks of life. You have people with the New York City Housing Department who are helping to clear the area. You also have volunteers who just came the first day, were allowed in when they needed help right away. People who really have little knowledge about this, but who are being given jobs when they got to the scene to help out. So you have people from all walks of life participating in this, and at times there are more than 2,000 people on the scene behind me helping out. And keep in mind, it's hard for you to grasp, especially if you haven't seen the World Trade Center before, but when you have 220 stories of 2 buildings that topple, it's a huge area, and this area is 10 blocks wide by 10 blocks long, roughly, that you have debris. So it's a huge area, and that's why there have to be so many people there helping out.
And they're doing 12-hour shifts, we understand, Gary. They have to be fed. Is just food being brought in? This must be with 2,000 people there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in these coming weeks. This is a massive logistical support effort, quite aside from the work they have to do there in the rubble.
Well, Garrick, let me tell you about that. I spent some time with a paramedic yesterday. She was actually there for 31 hours straight, from the beginning of this for 31 hours. And she took me with her to the site. I spent some time with her at the site. I just can't tell you how incredible being there was, and just I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had been here for a day and a half covering this from a few blocks away, and I was just totally stunned by the magnitude of this. But one thing I did notice, what you're referring to among the workers, yes, there's lots of food and lots of beverages, and you have people, one type of person who's been helping out are people who pass out the drinks and the food. And what they do is they walk around with trays and just hand it out to people as they go. Do you want some water? Do you want a soda? Do you want some food? So there's plenty of food and drinks for the people who are helping out.
Gary Tuckman, thank you very much. That kind of fuel and sustenance, if you will, for the rescue workers there in Lower Manhattan. Now back to Jim and Colleen.
All right, Garrick, thanks. And Garrick making a point about the massive logistical support necessary for the aid workers, but there's also some logistical support available for the friends and relatives, of course, of people who are missing. They're the people who are bearing the agony of not knowing the fate of the people missing in all of this. Day and night, they've lined the streets desperately searching for their loved ones, most of them actually carrying homemade flyers with pictures and telephone numbers. Many of them tell of precious last-minute phone calls from family members or friends.
I have a lot of hope. He left home that morning and he hasn't called back since then. He's a cadet. He's a trained EMT, and most probably as soon as he came into Manhattan, he just flagged someone down to go down and help the people in the World Trade Center bombing thing, just to help people take them out. He's a trained EMT. If anybody has seen him, most probably he's helping people.
He called his wife early in the morning on Tuesday, told the 88th floor was being evacuated. He was leaving. He left, and they never found him again. They never haven't seen him.
Well, public statements about the investigations into the attacks have so far focused on Muslim fundamentalists, and you can see the emotion in all of this. All of it's combined to create a bit of a backlash against some Muslim Americans in cities such as Chicago and Los Angeles. And it's prompted former President George Bush to warn against stereotyping. Listen in.
If, as the preliminary evidence suggests, this was an act of
bin Laden or some related group, or perhaps an entirely different group of radicals, we should be mindful that these were not the acts of all Muslims who, like Christians and Jews, believe in a God of love and mercy. Rather, these were senseless murders committed by religious extremists who kill out of hate.
Bill Clinton on the streets of New York trying to comfort those waiting for word on their missing family and friends. Clinton urged people to donate money to aid funds for the victims. He told the people there that the U.S. will find out who is responsible for the attacks. Well, some airports across the United States have reopened for business, but passengers are facing some tougher security measures. Now, no knives allowed at all, including plastic ones. No curbside or off-airport check-in allowed. Only ticketed passengers are allowed past metal detectors. Also, security personnel have to meet higher standards as well. And more federal marshals will be on hand at large airports. Jim?
Now, while those airports slowly return to normal operations, Northwest Airlines grounded all of its U.S. flights Thursday evening. The major carrier says it received information that it would not be prudent to fly at this time. Northwest did not mention why several earlier flights had been canceled. The airline set to resume operations on Friday. While most international flights into the United States are still prohibited, some that had been diverted to Canada on Tuesday were allowed to return to the United States. The first to land was an Alitalia plane flying from Calgary from Los Angeles. Further north in the Golden State, San Francisco's airport also opened up shop. CNN's James Hattori caught one of the first flights out.
The fifth busiest airport in the U.S. didn't look so busy Thursday morning as the nation's airlines struggled to regain their wings. One reason, no more curbside check-in. Bags must go to the counter. So now the crowds are inside. That's where I was, trying to get on a flight to Salt Lake City, Utah.
It's about 2 hours before our plane takes off, and the line of passengers here is about as long as a football field. We're not even sure the plane's going to be taking off. I did see a crew starting to go through the gate. That's encouraging.
I'm not going to believe we're going until I'm on the flight and we take off the runway.
The FAA now requires airlines to scrutinize passengers more carefully. Some changes are apparent. One new question, do you have any sharp objects like knives or scissors?
They took my scissors away.
At the check-in?
I guess my scissors was too pointy at the top.
In addition to ID checks, some bags apparently picked at random are hand searched, and only ticketed passengers allowed into the gate area. Less obvious changes, all aircraft must now be thoroughly checked for explosives before they're put into service for the day. The airlines are no longer permitted to carry cargo or mail within the continental U.S., except for the U.S. military. But with the tragedy in New York City still unfolding, no one seems to mind the delays and a little hassle.
You keep remembering so many people have it so much worse. I mean, this is nothing. You know, if you don't get out today, I don't get out today. At least I'm here and not there. So.
Some say Americans haven't paid enough attention to airline security.
We want things very convenient. We're a convenience-oriented people, and you can't have secure convenience.
Finally, after 3 hours to check in, we're off. Delta Flight 2027, a short 80-minute hop, which surprisingly is nearly empty, just 25 passengers. I wonder how many were left at the airport still in line.
All in all, our short trip was uneventful. A little longer, a few more questions than normal, but for a while at least, nothing about U.S. air travel will be normal. James Hattori, CNN, Salt Lake City, Utah.
And the American Automobile Association has released figures that should ease fears of widespread price hikes across the United States. There were reports Thursday of some outlets doubling their prices. That sparked fears of nationwide panic buying, with long lines forming in some states such as Indiana. But the AAA says that prices nationwide have risen by just 0.8 of a cent. That's an increase it describes as barely perceptible.
Now, the concerns of the fallout over this tragedy spread around the world, and that is the global economic situation. Of course, the markets in the United States closed until Monday, but they are open right now in Asia. Let's go now to London and Richard Quest for the latest there.
Indeed, Jim. Investors around the world, they're still trying to come to terms with the impact of what happened on Tuesday. It's now been 3 days since Wall Street last did business, And of course, without New York's guidance, it's been a very different sort of trading world, especially in Europe and Asia. A look at the numbers. Tokyo is up more than 3%. Hong Kong is down 0.5%. Singapore is down 3%. I think one has to point out that the markets did suffer very sharply in the days after the attack in New York, and perhaps that number in Tokyo is something of a rebound. A quick look on the currency markets. Trading is extremely subdued. The dollar is holding below the 119 level, coming in at 119.03. The euro at 90.95. The pound sterling is trading at 147, although what we're hearing from traders is that it's about 50% of normal activity taking place, New York being such an important part of the foreign exchange market. No surprises from the European Central Bank on Thursday. It decided to hold interest rates exactly where they were. And in the United States, the Chicago bond market opened its pits on Thursday. It was a shortened trading session where Treasury prices went higher. But the market's big test, of course, is on Monday. That's when US stock exchanges will resume trading after the 4-day shutdown. As rescuers continue their grim task of sifting through the rubble in New York, it's now becoming clear the size and scale of the damage inflicted, not only from the destruction to the World Trade Center, but to the surrounding buildings and businesses. The insurance industry believes the cost of repairing the physical damage could be anything up to $15 billion. CNN's Charles Hodson now reports from Zurich and London on the world's insurance companies who'll pay the bill.
Union flags are flying at half-mast outside London's Lloyd's insurance market in sorrow at Tuesday's terrible human toll. Now the industry is also calculating what it needs to do to cover the financial cost. There's the physical destruction of buildings and airplanes, but beyond that there'll be life and injury insurance claims, liability claims against the airlines over lack of security, and above all business interruption, loss of sales as Lower Manhattan remains closed. The industry can only guess how much that'll all come to.
All we know is it's huge. It will probably be the largest insured loss that we've had. May not be, don't know.
Analysts say stock markets wiped $50 billion off the value of major insurance companies right after Tuesday's attacks. Those stocks have now come back up to levels which reflect the sum now seen as the most likely final cost, $20 billion. That is more than the 10 to 15 billion the industry is suggesting, but not enough to disturb the calm at Europe's other major insurance centre, Zurich. Zurich Financial Services may have to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars. Its neighbour, Swiss Re, is looking at a figure closer to $1 billion. Executives share universal shock and distress at the attacks, but say financially they can take them in stride.
This is the moment that we are in business for. We absorb the large risks that the world has, and this is one of those risks. And we stand ready to help our clients get through the financial aspects of these kinds of events.
What the industry is really saying is this is what we're here for. We want to help with the financial impact of these attacks, and we're working together to do so. Charles Hodson, CNN, London.
That's all the business news from London for the moment. European trading starts in the next couple of hours. Now back to Colleen in Atlanta. Colleen, it may seem somewhat unfortunate and very sad that we do talk about money at times like this, but of course this was an attack at the heart of world capitalism.
Yeah, a symbol and a reality, Richard.
Richard, I have a question for you before you go, and it's something I didn't expect to see. I'm getting emails, some of the financial newsletters I get, advising Americans, don't change your investments. Leave them right where they are. Don't move them right now. It'll send the wrong signal. Others saying, go out there and spend some money, show consumer confidence. What are we to make of this? Is there a reaction, a human reaction coming from the money managers?
Well, at the moment, everybody's saying pretty much don't do anything. In times of crisis, in times of panic, the worst thing that any investor can do is take a decision that they will regret shortly thereafter. There's no doubt there will be a reaction in the US markets when they open on Monday. But markets have a habit of coming back. They have a knee-jerk reaction. We saw that quite clearly, Jim, just on Tuesday. They saw what was happening in New York. They reacted. Now we're seeing the unwinding of those positions. Europe didn't fall very heavily yesterday. Tokyo is actually up today. This is entirely normal. Markets react on the instant of news. So I would strongly suggest that wait and see. On the question of the wider question of recession, on the wider question of what this will mean to economies, the jury is still out. People don't know. If this crisis in New York causes a consumer crisis of confidence in the United States, it will make matters worse. But there's little doubt that no investor should take a decision in a time of panic. Wait and see exactly what happens. There'll be plenty of time to make your decisions further down the road.
All right, Richard, we trust your advice. You know that. Thanks for being with us.
Richard, thanks so much. Well, in Britain, the Queen and other members of the royal family are going to attend a service of remembrance at St. Paul's Cathedral. That's going to happen in London on Friday.
And get this, it was at Buckingham Palace today that the Queen ordered her royal guards to play the Star-Spangled Banner. That is an unprecedented break with tradition. We get more on the story from Libby Weiner.
The changing of the guard, a pageant normally performed mainly for tourists, transformed into a show of support for Britain's most important political ally. The American ambassador to London, William Farish, had been invited to attend the ceremony with the Duke of York. And in an unprecedented move, it was his country's anthem that was played first. Hundreds of Americans were gathered outside to listen as the band of the Coldstream Guards played the familiar tune. They then stood in silence as a mark of respect to the many thousands killed. The ambassador who will meet the Queen was said to be deeply moved by her decision to hold this special ceremony. Many visitors were also touched. The ceremony today is a powerful symbol of Britain's support for America. The Queen's decision to interrupt her holiday and return for a special service in London tomorrow, a sign of the royal family's awareness of the need to be seen to be standing side by side with the United States. Libby Weiner, ITN, at Buckingham Palace.
Well, it is nearly 2 a.m. in New York, and we saw in Gary Tuckman's live shot just a few minutes ago a light rain falling. Some heavy rain fell earlier, but still the search for any possible survivors buried beneath the remains of the World Trade Center does go on at this hour.
The rescue workers are still there. Also, there are some of the people desperately looking for their loved ones. We're going to leave you now with some of the thoughts that they had this day.
Sadie called at about 5 minutes after 9. She said, "Oh God, please save me." She said she's trapped on the 106th floor. She was screaming that she can't get out. She's trapped, she can't get out. So she was yelling. She said, "Now, I don't know what to do. I'm coughing. The heat is coming. Please, I'm coming. I need water, I need water." And the phone dropped.
We've been hearing lots of good stories about people making it off of really high floors, so we just know that she's one of them, and we just have to figure out where she is.
The first phone call that he made to her was that they are evacuating, and we were all very happy because we were all kind of on the phone, my whole family and my sister. We were all like, "Oh my God, what happened?" Because I work downtown. And then they said they were evacuating. We were all happy. "Go, go, go," said my sister, "go." And then he called again and said, "Oh, you know what, everything's fine, don't worry." He was trying to calm her down. "Stay calm, I love you so much, don't worry about me, I'll be okay." And then they hung up, and then as soon as about 50 seconds later, the other airplane hit. We saw it on the news.
Well, it's really frustrating because you just want to go in there and start tearing things out, ripping them sheet metal. The sheet metal workers are doing it, the steel workers are in there, the pipe fitters, everybody, engineers, Con Ed, I mean, just everybody. And it's frustrating because you have to stop. You hear whistles, signals for you to stop because they think they hear a sound, a movement. they'll stop. I mean, total silence. And, you know, and then it might be false alarm, or if it is, you have to, people are so buried down there, you have no idea.
Rescue workers battle fatigue as they search for signs of life and keep a wary eye on the weather.
A bird's eye view of New York's shattered landscape, twisted metal, broken glass, carpet southern Manhattan.
Refusing to think, much less say what they fear most, families and friends are clinging to hope and sending out an SOS.
And on the paper trail of the suspected hijackers, a search for clues leads the FBI to a rental car company in Pompano Beach, Florida.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jim Clancy.
And I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center. This is CNN's continuing coverage of America under attack. Chilling pictures from Ground Zero we want to bring to you. This video shot Thursday from actually inside the ruins in Manhattan. And as workers there spent another agonizing day, some new developments to tell you about. Several people are arrested Thursday at New York City's two major airports. Authorities at those locations concerned about the possibility of yet another hijacking attempt. But the search for suspects in Tuesday's terrorist attacks was not confined to the United States. Authorities in the Philippines raided a Manila hotel thought to have possible links to the attacks in the U.S.
There was a joint operation between the Philippine police and U.S. operatives, including Bayview Hotel, which is just in front of the U.S. Embassy, with regard to some suspected links between what happened in the U.S. and some of the connections that might have been in the Philippines.
And meantime, at the Pentagon, firefighters sent scrambling once again as a fire briefly reignited at that scene of devastation. Just briefly, though. Jim?
Well, it's just after 2 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast of the United States. Recovery operations continuing in Washington and in Manhattan. In New York, there's some concern that the weather might complicate the efforts there. CNN's Garrick Utley is monitoring the situation. Garrick?
There was a heavy thunderstorm, Jim, with lightning striking all around Manhattan Island a short while ago. The worst of that storm has been moving through, and it did perhaps slow down work for a short while. But obviously the workers are going to continue on their 24-hour basis. They can put on rain jackets and ponchos and slickers and keep going through that rubble there. But since it is a little bit after 2 a.m. East Coast time in New York, and the city, as the cliche goes, a city that never sleeps, and of course these days a lot of people are finding it very difficult to sleep, particularly if they have people, friends and relatives who are lost in the World Trade Center disaster. We wanted to check in to find out what some of those who can't sleep perhaps at this hour have been doing. Because there's a center, a gathering point in Manhattan at an armory where people have been coming all day during the day, and occasionally somebody comes by in the evening to exchange information, to ask people whether they can give them any kind of a help or indication as to when their loved ones were last seen in the World Trade Center. It's a human gathering point, and our Judy Ross is there. Jody Ross is there. Jody? Do we have Jody Ross over at the Armory right now?
Garrick, the inclement weather down at the World Trade Center might be affecting the rescue effort down there, but the rescue effort here continues. There's food being delivered right behind me at the Armory. They've actually told me they're in desperate need of towels and dog food for the canine units here. So again, people are still around. It's a much more sparse crowd, but we are joined again by two family members in search of a loved one, Derek and Cynthia. It's a brother and a brother-in-law, respectively, that you are looking for.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about him?
His name is Uhuru Gunja Houston. He's a Port Authority officer. He's been working at the World Trade Center for approximately a year or two. Before that, he was stationed at the Port Authority bus terminal. I'm understanding that he was on duty there, probably undercover that morning. His tour duty is normally 7 to 3 a.m. One of his co-workers had told me that right before the building had collapsed, that he had spoken to him and they went separate ways. He was able to make it out, his co-worker was, right before the building did collapse, and we have no word up until this point where he may be. We're hopeful that he's okay. I believe he's okay, and we're just hoping that the rescue workers that are working so diligently down there, these guys are giving up their blood, sweat, and tears. We're hoping that they're able to get to my brother as well as all of the other people that we know that are still underneath the disaster area, that they may be able to rescue them before we have more of a collapse due to the weather or something of that nature.
Right, and you're both wearing masks, which makes me think you've made an attempt to go down to the disaster area. How close did you get, and were you doing your own search down there?
We weren't able to complete or even venture into a search. It was pretty strict trying to get across 14th Street. We made it down to St. Vincent's Hospital on 11th Street, but there are a lot of police officers and military personnel, and they're down there, and they're just trying to keep the area clear and free for the emergency vehicles to get in and out and do what they have to do there.
Cynthia, I know you're having a difficult time with this as well. Can you discuss your feelings with me at all, describe the feelings at all?
Just this whole situation is a tragedy, not only for us on a personal level, but on a global level. It's sad, but you can't give up hope, and so we're still hopeful, and we just can't think anything but that he's still alive and that we're going to find him, and any help that we can get in doing that is greatly appreciated.
If you could get a message to him right now, what would you say?
Hang in there and know that we love you, and we're out here at 2 o'clock in the morning trying
Sonia and Hassani
Yes,
and Haina, they're waiting for you, and they need you to come home. So
Yeah.
just please, if anyone has seen him or know his whereabouts, if you can get to a phone. We know you got a phone. We know you're trying to get to a phone to call Sonia. Call somebody and let us know you're all right.
Okay. All right, you guys. Thank you and good luck. Again, so many stories tonight, so many different people that we speak to. The rain was really bad a short time ago, and that made some of the people scatter from this area and go home and find shelter. But I have to say, the posters, the signs, the pictures that they've posted, those have not come down. It seems nothing, not even bad weather, could make these images disappear. Garrick, back to you.
Thank you very much, Jody Ross, there at the Armory. Of course, we've been focusing in these last few days in our reports on those who are missing and perhaps even lost for very good and understandable reasons. But the explosions that brought down those twin towers in Lower Manhattan, they had, of course, ripple effects, perhaps even we should say shock waves that spread out, particularly hitting those who lived, whose personal lives were led in apartments and small homes in the area around the World Trade Center. Now, what they found suddenly was that they had no power. Their whole area had been secured by police, so rescue efforts could be continued. They couldn't really move in or out easily, and perhaps there's even structural dangers in the buildings they were living in. And so the time would come for many of these people when they had to leave home. They were told that they were being evacuated. No questions, get out, move, we've got transportation for you. When that time comes, it's an emotional, wrenching moment. Here's a report from our Jason Bellini, who followed some of these people.
Wednesday night, the mixture of dust and smoke became unbearable, in the minds of the authorities at least, who decided to evacuate people living in apartments near the smoldering rubble of the World Trade Center.
I want to go back. They say no, can go back no more. So that's why I don't have clothes, I don't have medicine, nothing.
What kind of medicine do you?
I take it. I have cancer. I take cancer.
Kaduko and her neighbors had no choice in the matter. The evacuation notice came suddenly. The buses were already waiting downstairs. When Kaduko was told to leave her apartment, she didn't quite get it. So that's why she took nothing with her. Most of her neighbors took the first things that came to mind.
Wherever I go, this goes with me.
Wherever you go, this goes with you.
That's Sonny Rollins, one of the top jazz saxophonists in the world.
These residents of 310 Greenwich Street found out just moments ago as they were getting on the bus the location of the shelter they're being taken to. What happens once they get there, they have no idea. Kaduko says she has no family. She'll try to contact a friend later tonight.
Could you let us know back here where we're going?
Maybe this is a crock.
Hello, I'm just as afraid as you are.
Hold on, there you go. When they unboard at the shelter, some neighbors disperse, going to stay with friends and family.
Not so okay.
Others, including Kaduko, will sleep in the shelter, at least on this night.
I have to talk to the doctor to maybe get medicine or not.
Decided to send them there.
Before I get medicine, then maybe I call my...
Is there room on the bus?
Kaduko takes it in stride. She thinks it's all going to be okay. Jason Bellini, CNN, New York.
And so quickly, so suddenly, a shelter becomes a home or at least a hostel. For how long? Who knows? Colleen?
Garrick, thanks so much. We want to take you to Pakistan now. We've got some news developing out of there. Tom Mantir has been monitoring the situation in Pakistan's capital, Islamabad, where the Taliban have an announcement from their embassy, Pakistan being one of the few countries that has diplomatic relations with the Taliban. He joins us now live with more. Tom, what have you got?
Colleen, we're expecting a statement from Mullah Omar. He is the head of the Taliban government. It is going to be released here in Islamabad, Pakistan, at the Taliban embassy here in Islamabad. The reporters are inside the room already, and any minute we're expecting to hear a statement read out by the ambassador here in Islamabad from Mullah Omar. Now, this could be a hardening of their position or a change of their position. It's still too early to say, but in the next few moments we're going to be hearing, although indirectly, from the Taliban government through their spokesman here in Islamabad, possibly about the resolution of this situation, as I said earlier, or possibly even a hardening of the situation. They have always said that one of the conditions, if the United States could provide concrete evidence to them, that they would turn Osama bin Laden over to an Islamic court. Again, probably a condition the United States would not accept, but it has been their long-standing position. What we may hear in the next few minutes is a possible change in that position, but we'll have to wait and see. Right now, that meeting is going on inside the Taliban embassy here in Islamabad, and we expect in the next few minutes to hear what this announcement is from the Taliban government of their position as it stands this morning. Colleen?
All right, Tom, and of course, we'll come back to you just as soon as you get it, so stay with us right here. Tom, thanks very much. Jim, over to you.
All right, let's take a look once again and recap what's been going on in the investigation. Authorities remain alert, of course, against the threat of another hijacking. At least 8 people are now known to be in police custody after they were arrested Thursday at New York's Kennedy and LaGuardia airports. 4 of those people were seen at airport ticket counters back on Tuesday, the day of the attacks. They fled on Tuesday when they were confronted. As Mike Betcher reports, the arrests are just part of a larger investigation that has a global reach.
As airports opened across the country, police were watching closely. A total of 8 people were arrested at 2 of New York's airports. At New York's Kennedy Airport, one man who was carrying a fake pilot ID was arrested. 4 or 5 other people trying to check in for flights at Kennedy were detained for questioning, either because they were carrying false documents or were in the country illegally. At New York's LaGuardia Airport, police detained at least 2 other men for questioning. After the spate of arrests and detentions, all New York area airports were closed again. A few other airports in the U.S. have also shut down once more because of security concerns. Attorney General John Ashcroft said FBI agents are making progress in their investigation, adding that they have identified the hijackers aboard all 4 ill-fated jets.
The total number of hijackers, to our best estimate and our best knowledge, given the information at this time, on the 4 planes that crashed was at least 18, unless contradicted by evidence which we wouldn't anticipate. 2 planes had 5 hijackers and 2 other planes had 4 hijackers each.
Mohammed Atta, shown in this photograph, and Marwan al-Shari are 2 of the men on that list of 18, according to federal investigative sources. Both held United Arab Emirate passports, but it's not clear if they are actually citizens of that country. The lives the two men led are the objects of an intensive international investigation, stretching from Florida to Germany. In Hamburg, Germany, federal police launched an extensive search of an apartment shared by Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shari last February. During an additional search of another Hamburg apartment, a woman was taken away for questioning. She clutched a baby in her arms as German police tried to hide her with a sheet. During the night, a total of 8 apartments were searched in the Hamburg area. Back in the U.S. in Pompano Beach, Florida, FBI agents converged on a small rental car company called Warwick's. Records show that Atta rented 2 automobiles at that location.
Well, the first contract, he only put on 200 miles, 254 miles or something like that, which is very small. That's exceptionally small. The next contract was the 2-week rental, and he drove 1,915 miles, which he had told me he'd been over on the West Coast. He called me from over on the West Coast.
4,000 FBI agents spread across the country knocked on hundreds of doors trying to track down others who were involved in the conspiracy. Before the job is finished, they will have knocked on tens of thousands more. Mike Betcher, CNN, Atlanta.
At the Pennsylvania crash site, a deep crater gives up an important piece of evidence. Investigators on Thursday found the flight data recorder, one of the Boeing 757's 2 so-called black boxes. Now, this box records the plane's operation in flight, and authorities are sending it to Washington for examination. The search is expected to resume Friday morning for the plane's cockpit voice recorder. Those will be extremely important as well. Family members say some of the passengers plan to confront the hijackers in the moments just before it crashed. And as they go through this awful scene, searchers are finding debris scattered across a huge area. Wreckage from the plane has turned up as far as 8 miles away. The jet crashed about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, killing all 45 people on board. Well, it is in the early morning hours in the U.S. Capitol. President Bush is going to be heading to New York later on this morning. Major Garrett joins us now with the very latest there from Washington. Major?
Colleen, in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy in New York and Virginia, members of Congress, Republican and Democrat, pledged immediate and bipartisan support for President Bush in whatever response the U.S. undertook. Well, the first evidence of that swift bipartisan action is now before us. The White House and senior congressional negotiators, Republican and Democrat, have reached an agreement on a $40 billion emergency supplemental spending bill to provide immediate assistance in New York and Virginia recovery and cleanup efforts, and also to assist the president in whatever counterterrorism activities he undertakes. This $40 billion amount is twice what the administration asked Congress for, a clear signal from Congress that it is ready to pony up federal resources, not only to provide cleanup and recovery efforts in New York and Virginia, but also to back whatever counterterrorism actions he chooses to undertake. The president discussed this very aid package earlier Thursday at the White House with members of the New York and Virginia congressional delegations. You see the junior senator of New York, former First Lady Hillary Clinton, there very next to the president. Other members of the Virginia and New York delegations were there. The House of Representatives will vote on this legislation late Friday afternoon after the president and members of the New York delegation return from the president's trip to New York City to see the damage to New York City. The Senate is then expected to pass the legislation Friday evening. It is due to be on the president's desk for his signature on Saturday. The president also talked to Mayor Rudolph Giuliani of New York and the governor of New York, George Pataki, by phone from the Oval Office, and thereafter he took questions from reporters about the entire situation. One of the questions was very personal, asking the president how he felt, and his response, the president showed the emotion, the pressure the situation has borne upon him.
I think about the families, the children. I'm a loving guy, and I'm also someone, however, who's got a job to do, and I intend to do it. And this is a terrible moment. But this country will not relent until we have saved ourselves and others from the terrible tragedy that came upon America.
Thank you. Colleen, U.S. presidential history is replete with presidents having to confront epic tragedies. Many U.S. presidents have had to deal with the loss of thousands of U.S. service personnel on any given day. We can think of Abraham Lincoln reading the messages, the telegrams from the front lines during the Civil War, of FDR receiving the notice of the thousands of deaths on D-Day, Harry Truman getting the horrible details from the first days of the Korean War, Lyndon Johnson, the daily death counts in Vietnam. But what separates this president from all those previous presidents is the civilian casualties, the thousands of Americans, all civilians, who never took up arms, never agreed to take up arms, nevertheless victims in this first war of the 21st century. The president's emotions clearly etched upon his face as he deals with that very new and very painful presidential reality. There's also another reality here in the nation's capital. We'll show you some videotape we shot just a few moments ago of a search helicopter that rotates and spins over the White House in a rather rhythmic, slow motion search. You can see its searchlight piercing the early morning darkness here in the nation's capital. As I stand here, I can hear it, the helicopter thrumming in the distance. There is a heightened level of security all around the White House. The Secret Service has extended the normal security perimeter several blocks around the White House. I've talked to several members of Congress and their aides who are very edgy indeed. There was a bomb scare on Capitol Hill this afternoon, evacuation order there. You don't want to get melodramatic in a situation like this, and you certainly don't want to overplay or over-describe the sense of edginess around here, but it is very real, it is very palpable. I would describe that helicopter searching the night as a precaution. No sense of panic, but very high sense of precaution here in the nation's capital. Colleen?
Well, and this is an enormous test for this president so early in his young mandate. We saw his emotion today. You were with him in Sarasota on Tuesday when he first got news that this had happened. How was he then?
Well, the events were just so unreal, so unimaginable, so incalculable for all of us who were with the president in Sarasota. The most remarkable part of that morning, Colleen, is how ordinarily it began. The president took a jog. He actually brought some reporters with him. He was in a very good mood when it finished. You know, one of the assumptions about the president of the United States, the leader of the free world, is that he always knows everything, and he's always on top of everything. He can always anticipate everything. Well, there was no more stark proof that that's not always the case than what I observed that Tuesday morning. Here was the president of the United States coming back from a relaxing jog, talking with reporters, saying he had a good run, feeling great, looking forward to an event to talk about education reform, a high domestic priority. And very soon after arriving at Emma E. Booker Elementary School in Sarasota, he gets the word of the first jet crashing into the World Trade Center. He moves in, tries to carry on with that morning, sits down with a room full of children, begins to read them a book. As he is reading them a book, very innocent, very genteel setting, in walks his chief of staff, Andrew Card, who whispers the dreadful news that a second jet has crashed into the other tower. The president's face darkens. You can see the emotion running down his face. Reporters say, "Mr. President, have you heard? Have you heard?" He raises a hand. "We'll talk about it later." Trying to protect the children sitting mere feet in front of him from the conversation that he must very soon thereafter have with the nation. Moments later, he reads his very first statement telling the nation of an apparent act of terrorism. Moments later, he is whisked away, and we get the dreadful news of the plane crashing into the Pentagon. All of this, the press corps who travels with the president, watching this on television monitors, all of us turning to each other, thinking the thoughts that were thought by millions of Americans. Can this possibly be happening? The president takes off. We are told for Washington. We check our watches. An hour and a half later, he still hasn't landed. We learn later he goes to another Air Force base to carry on his day. Colleen?
All right, CNN's Major Garrett, thanks very much. Jim?
Now, normally, if the U.S. was planning any kind of a reprisal for this, the contingency plans would be being made fast and furiously within the Pentagon. But that building, the seat of military power in the United States, is a wounded building right now, one damaged, of course, by one of the suicide plane pilots as he plowed into that building on Tuesday. Our Mark Potter is there in the Pentagon with the latest. Mark?
Well, good morning again, Jim. There was a little bit of a drama earlier here today at the Pentagon as workers, as they have been for 24 hours a day, continued to go through the rubble. A sizable blaze, which you can see here, broke out. Officials thought that they had the area under control, the fire under control. originally, but they had warned that there were some hot spots still that could flare up, and as you can see, it happened again. As you can also see right at this moment, it didn't take firefighters very long to get the blaze out. It took only about 25 minutes. The workers were able to get out of the area in time, and we're told that no one was hurt. So at this early morning hour, as you can see from this live picture, the fire is out and workers continue to sift through the debris, looking for victims and for the voice and data recorders, the so-called black boxes from the American Airlines 757 jet, which hit the building Tuesday morning. Pentagon officials estimate that about 190 people were killed here, including the passengers on that aircraft. Now, if we can show you a graphic that we have, that we've put together, if we have that, it shows that where the plane hit, right, you can see here, it badly damaged one of the 5 sides of this world-famous military complex. That area damaged not only by the impact, but by the very intense fire. About half the building was shut down as a result of that incident, although we can see tonight that some of the corridors have been reopened. We're told, however, that the building is fully operational, with many workers, however, having to double up their offices. Meanwhile, on CNN's Larry King Live, the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, said that whenever the U.S. decides to respond to the terrorist attacks, it will be a long-term campaign and should not be seen as mere retaliation.
I don't think of it as retaliation. I don't think of it as punishment. I think of it as self-defense. The United States of America has every right to defend itself, and that is what it is about. It is consciously saying that countries and entities and people who actively oppose the United States and damage our interests by acts of violence, acts of war, are our enemies, and they are people and organizations and entities and states that we have every right to defend ourselves against.
Now, here at the Pentagon, we can tell you that President Bush is considering activating as many as 50,000 military reservists. They would be, we are told, involved in the disaster recovery effort. They would also be assisting the National Guard pilots who have been flying combat air patrols around the country, or who have been on standby at bases around the country. Secretary Rumsfeld said that those combat air patrols continue in the Washington, D.C., New York City corridor, and that at 26 bases around the country, pilots are on a 15-minute standby. A Pentagon official cautions that if those reservists are called up, it should not be read by the citizens of this country as a sign that a U.S. military attack is imminent. Back to you.
All right, Mark Potter reporting there live from the Pentagon. We want to now give you an update of the latest developments. A steady rain, a monsoon as it's been described at some points, has been falling in New York. We've seen lightning flashing across the sky in that city. Now, this may have slowed down a bit the rescue and recovery efforts that are underway at the World Trade Center. You're looking at the Armory building now, where many of the family members have gathered. No survivors, though, were found on Thursday amid the ruins in New York City. Mayor Rudy Giuliani saying around 4,700 people still missing. President Bush plans to visit this scene on Friday and get a first-hand look at the destruction in America's largest city. But with candlelight vigils and special services, people across the United States are remembering the terrorism victims in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. Friday has been designated as a National Day of Prayer and Remembrance. In the investigation now, at least 8 people have been arrested Thursday at New York City's 2 major airports, one carrying a fake pilot's license. Authorities there are concerned about the possibility of yet another hijacking attempt. They also say 4 of those arrested were seen at one of the airports the day of the terrorist attacks. Sources telling CNN that on Tuesday the 4 fled as they were challenged at the ticket counter.
Well, much of the anger you've been hearing and perhaps feeling is being directed against the militant leader Osama bin Laden, making matters more difficult. U.S. officials say that more than one terrorist group may have been involved in these attacks. And as CNN's David Ensor reports, getting at bin Laden may prove to be very difficult.
The nation is angry about thousands of innocent deaths. U.S. officials say the evidence so far points to Osama bin Laden's group, and the Bush administration is talking tough.
We will go after that group, that network, and those who have harbored, supported, and aided that network to rip the network up. And when we're through with that network, we will continue with a global assault against terrorism in general.
But if it is bin Laden, how to get at him and his top lieutenants? Some argue for giving Afghanistan's Taliban government an ultimatum. Turn him over or else.
We know where your ministries are. We know where your houses are. We're simply going to obliterate them from the face of the planet.
Bouncing that rubble with a lot of B-52 loads of bombs, I don't think is going to change Afghanistan all that much.
No, say most analysts in and out of government. If you want to roll up bin Laden and al-Qaeda, it is going to take more than bombs. It will take ground troops.
In order for us to preserve America and our way of life, we're going to have to sacrifice American treasure and, unfortunately, in some cases, perhaps some American blood.
It is not just a question of grabbing or killing one man or even 20. There are a dozen or more training camps, U.S. intelligence says, producing more terrorists dedicated to killing Americans.
Revenge alone is not an answer. There has to be a complete eradication and elimination of all the training camps.
And much of bin Laden's base of support is in neighboring Pakistan, through which money from around the Arab world is funneled to the al-Qaeda coffers. It is a treacherous and dangerous area indeed.
If you start moving in ground troops and you're willing to occupy countries for long periods of time, you do change things rather significantly for terrorists. I'm not sure this country is ready to do that, even if it does have a fit of passion right now, and it may or may not make sense for the U.S. to do that in its larger interests.
Bottom line, U.S. forces might be able to get bin Laden, but that alone would not stop the terror. Administration officials saying they will do nothing precipitous, knowing this one is going to be very, very difficult. David Ensor, CNN, Washington.
Well, not knowing the fate of family members and friends is tearing many people apart, but still people are coming together like never before, and they refuse to let the candle of hope burn out.
I haven't seen the American karma come together like this since the Vietnam War. Everybody feels the same way. Everybody has anger, but everybody has compassion. There is no script for what to say, and there's no script for how to feel.
My father was a window washer on Tower 2, the observation deck. He worked the rig outside. He last called us at 9:15 a.m. from the 105th floor, where he said there was 200 to 300 people just on that floor waiting for them to be told to head down. He said, don't panic to my mom. He said, don't get upset. Tell my kids I'm going to be okay, not to worry about it. I'm in God's hands.
Sadie called at about 5 minutes after 9. She said, oh God, please save me. She said she's trapped on the 106th floor. She was screaming that she can't get out. She's trapped, she can't get out. So she was yelling. She said, now, I don't know what to do. I'm coughing. The heat is coming. Please, I'm coming. I need water, I need water. And the phone dropped. We have checked the whole list in the armory over there. She's not on the dead list. She's not on the list on the hospital, so we are hoping for the best.
She was on the 93rd floor of the 2nd Trade Center. We talked to her last after the first crash, and she called everyone to tell everybody that she was okay. And so we haven't heard anything since then, but we know she's there. So we're just, getting her face out there so everyone can find her. And we covered all the hospitals and have her on the missing persons. And everyone's here to support us, so it's great. So you just have to find her. We know we will.
Tell us what happened over there, and if anybody got out, and if anyone made it, please call us.
We're looking for her. I'm looking for my son, Sal. He left home that morning and he hasn't called back since then.
We're desperate. Everyone's desperate for information.
And one of New York's newest residents also lent his support Thursday to relatives and friends of the missing.
4 first thing the other morning.
Former President Bill Clinton comforting those who came to the Armory to post flyers with information on their loved ones. He urged them to support President Bush at this time, regardless of party affiliation, and he asked them to donate money to relief funds as well if they can. Clinton returned to New York this morning from a trip to Australia. Well, our colleagues at CNN.com have launched an effort to help locate people who are missing in New York. This may help you. If you have a picture of a missing friend or relative, you can go to our website. Follow the instructions there to send us the picture. Send CNN.com the picture along with a contact number. They're going to try to get those posted there. Jim?
There's a lot of people that are trying to help. Everybody seems to be pitching in, Colleen, and corporations large and small opening up their doors and opening up their pocketbooks, we might add, for the relief efforts for the victims of this tragedy. Smaller companies like the Silicon Alley Reporter and BlueFly.com are offering office space free of charge to businesses left homeless by Tuesday's terrorist attack. General Electric has made the most generous gestures so far. That company donating $10 million to families of rescue workers who lost their lives when the World Trade Center collapsed. Well, Wednesday we brought you the story of Morgan Stanley and what the officials there call the miraculous escape of almost all of the company's employees from the World Trade Center. Sadly, we have to bring you the other side of that, the story of a firm that was not as fortunate. CNN's Peter Viles has that story.
It is the saddest vigil you can imagine. Scott Hazelcorn's parents.
It's not even revenge. I mean, I just want to hear my son's voice.
Members of Jun Koo Kang's church.
We all pray every night.
John Perconti's wife, expecting their child in December.
He called me at 10 to 9 and said, our building has just been hit by a plane, turn on the news. And I changed the channel and I saw what happened. And I said, oh God, John, please get out of there safely. And he said, I love you, I have to go.
What links these stories is that all the missing worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, all above the 100th floor of the North Tower, the first one hit. Cantor is not a glamorous firm, but it is crucial, one of the world's largest bond trading firms. 1,000 people worked up there, fewer than 300 are accounted for, but it is not clear any of those now safe were on the top floors Tuesday morning.
I don't think anybody got out at this point, but we pray for miracles.
Scott Hazelcorn's parents suspect that their son did not run for his life.
He didn't care about himself, he only cared about his friends.
If Scott was there and he was getting out, he'd probably help everybody up in front of him. That's the kind of kid he was.
They gather at a city-designated center for relatives of the missing on 26th Street, where trees have become pleas for help. And further uptown at the Pierre Hotel, a gathering site for Cantor Fitzgerald families.
I don't think the company has the information that we need. I think they're sharing everything they know, but we have not heard of one survivor. We've not been able to validate any stories that we've heard.
There are official clearinghouses for information on the missing, and Cantor Fitzgerald is using them, but these friends and family members are convinced that any extra effort they can make on behalf of their loved ones is worth making. Peter Viles, CNN Financial News, New York.
The Taliban, the rulers of Afghanistan, are relaying a message to Islamabad, Pakistan's capital. That's where we find CNN's Tom Mintier with the latest. Tom?
Jim, the message is out. Indeed, it is not a breakthrough, but basically a hardening of the position. Mullah Omar made the statement through his ambassador here in Islamabad, saying that it was impossible for Osama bin Laden to do this. He says there are no planes in Afghanistan, no place to train pilots in Afghanistan. They don't have the pilots to do that. It's not possible that it was done by Osama bin Laden. They say he has no fax, no means of communications, no telephone, no computers, that whoever did this, they condemned this act of terrorism. that if you want to deal with it, you need to find evidence and capture those who are guilty, and you need to be based on evidence. They're saying that the reputation of Osama bin Laden may be what's at center stage here rather than actual evidence held by the United States, something I'm sure U.S. officials will counter and say that is not true. They claim they do have evidence pointing towards Osama bin Laden, that he is the top suspect. So basically a denial of involvement once again by the Taliban of Osama bin Laden, not a breakthrough, but a hardening of position, Jim.
Tom Interior, there are hundreds of thousands of Afghan refugees right there on Pakistani soil. A conflict that might involve the Taliban and engulf Afghanistan, what effect could it have on a country like Pakistan?
It could have a tremendous effect. There are a lot of people on both sides of the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and if there are hostilities, once again, Afghan refugees will be streaming out of the country, trying to get out of harm's way. The direction they will come, of course, will be Pakistan. So there is indeed a potential refugee crisis of enormous potential if indeed there are hostilities along the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's happened before, the last time that the United States attempted to lash out at Osama bin Laden. The refugees came out, and if there are hostilities, it will probably be a repeat of that same situation.
All right, Tom Interior reporting there live for us from Islamabad, Pakistan. Thanks, Tom. Colleen?
All right, just want to update you on the market situation a little bit here. The New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ will remain closed this Friday, but elsewhere in the world, markets are open. The mood has been quite subdued. Let's get an update now with Richard Quest, who is in London for us. Richard, how's it looking there now?
Well, you're quite right, Colleen. The markets in the United States are closed. It'll be 9:30 Eastern Time on Monday when US stock markets reopen for business. And that indeed is the longest closure since the Great Depression. And most analysts do not expect massive selling to occur because policymakers, the Fed, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, they've all ensured investors that there's sufficient cash or liquidity, in the words of the market, to support the financial system. Many are also anticipating that there could be a lowering of interest rates that would help revive the US economy. Now, turning to what it's been for the rest of the week in the global markets. In Asia, the Friday session has finished on a surprisingly upbeat note. The Nikkei average has closed 4% higher. Hong Kong's market, having been down earlier, again, that's at 1.3%. Singapore's Straits Times is off 2.6%. It's very much an unwinding of the initial reaction that was seen earlier in the week, as, of course, calmer minds now take over. European investors have regained their composure too in the last 2 days, even though there's still a tremendous amount of uncertainty about how Wall Street will behave when trading finally resumes. An indication of the likely way that Europe will open when trading kicks off. That's in about 15 minutes' time. Cantor Index says that the London FTSE will start about 23 points on the low side. The DAX Index about 2 points higher. The CAC 15, that will be up around 15 points. Those are the sort of numbers we might expect on any normal day. There was a partial resumption of US commercial and cargo traffic on Thursday, 2 days after the attacks. Normal operations, though, look days or even weeks away, and the airline's financial losses keep mounting, with only a fraction of the 4,000 US planes in operation. Daniel Solon is a consultant for Avmark International. He joins me now to take a closer look at the attacks that have taken place and indeed on the industry. Daniel, we know that few flights are starting to fly, but the reality is for international travel to and from the United States, it's going to be many days, some weeks possibly, before the schedule looks like anything approaching normality.
Exactly so, and of course this is already approaching a slower period of traffic than the high summer months, so it is likely that it will be some while before things regain even normal operational status.
What's the major difficulty? Is it that the planes and passengers aren't in the right places? What's the...
It takes a long time, really, to crank up again when you have aircraft that are parked at the wrong airports for obvious reasons of security. I would think that probably within a matter of a few days, that aspect of it can be sorted out, but there will, of course, be all of the other disruptions, people's baggage having been routed to someplace that they weren't going, and all of the rest of it.
The effect on the airlines is going to be dramatic, not just because of the 4 days loss of revenue from over this immediate time, But looking forward, there will be clearly a great reduction in the number of people who want to travel.
Well, I think that is true, obviously, because of the impact of the tragic loss for surviving family members and friends of people who perished in these attacks. That tends to have a depressant effect, much more widely spread. But beyond that, we were already in a situation prior to these tragic events when traffic was down, and notably business traffic, the profitable high-yield part of the business within the United States and traffic originating there for international travel had dropped off rather sharply before these events.
Daniel, many thanks indeed. Daniel Solon for that. And that's all from London for the moment. Now back to Colleen in Atlanta for the rest.
All right, Richard, thank you so much. We want to update you now on the very latest that we've got here right now. As the difficult work of recovery and cleanup in New York is made even more difficult by some rain, congressional leaders have been busy as well this night. They've doubled President Bush's request for money in response to the attacks. We're told that final details of a $40 billion package were worked out overnight. Congressional approval could come on Friday. CNN's Major Garrett reporting also that bill could be ready for signing as early as the weekend. President Bush will visit Manhattan Friday, get a first-hand look at the devastation there. Mr. Bush is urging Americans to observe a national day of prayer and remembrance Friday for the victims. At least 8 people are arrested Thursday at New York City's 2 major airports, one carrying a fake pilot's license. Authorities there are concerned about the possibility of yet another hijacking attempt. They also say 4 of those arrested were seen at one of the airports the day of the terrorist attacks. Sources tell CNN that on Tuesday the 4 fled as they were challenged at the ticket counter. Jim?
All right, well, we want to go back to New York once again, live to our own Garrick Utley. He's been standing by there, taking the pulse of that city as it suffers through another day, a day waiting for word of survivors, hoping for the best and fearing the worst. Garrick?
Jim, one of the paradoxes of this tragic week in New York City is that it's been perhaps one of the most beautifully, gorgeously beautiful weeks of the whole summer in terms of the weather. In fact, this week the highs were in the upper 70s, not a single cloud in the sky. Even that morning, you'll recall when those planes hit those towers, the Twin Towers in lower Manhattan. And it's an indication of the shock that really nobody that I know in New York could enjoy that good weather, could even look up in the blue sky and have a happy thought. Well, now the weather has changed. A short while ago, there were thunder showers and lightning storms coming through. It affected the work. We want to go back to Gary Tuckman, who's downtown, to give us not only the latest weather report, but how that's impacted on the work there. Gary?
Well, Garrick, it's still thundering and lightning. The rain is starting to come down hard once again. It is getting colder, and it's very windy, and it's making a miserable scenario even more miserable for the searchers behind me. That's the scene. You can see the floodlights. You can see the smoke continuing to billow. And when you get close to the scene, you see the huge mountains of rubble that are 75 feet tall at some points, and you see that steam coming up. It really looks like a scene from hell. The number one goal of the 1,000 to 2,000 searchers and rescuers who are there at any given time is to find survivors. And unfortunately today, the news was not good. There were no survivors found in the rubble. There was some news earlier today that excited many people. And it's the anatomy of a story we want to tell you about. There was some confusion. Rescuers on the scene saw 5 firefighters, they say, being pulled out of the rubble. They assumed these were survivors from the Tuesday terrorism incident. Police and hospital officials confirmed the story, but as it turned out, it was confusion because while the people on the scene saw firefighters being pulled out, it turns out they had gotten trapped while participating in the rescue today. There was so much rubble, there's lots of potential for that to happen. So what happened was these firefighters were rescued, but they were rescued from being trapped a few hours earlier. They had not been there since Tuesday. To confirm the number of people, we can't even do that right now. It was between 2 and 5 firefighters found today who had been trapped today. But once again, they were not there since Tuesday. And what's very frightening about this entire situation, in addition to no survivors being found today, is that it's very likely that there are up to 4,700 bodies still buried in the rubble just 3 blocks behind me. Another concern for the people who are there in the scene, there are 3 buildings that are felt to be structurally unsound. There's a possibility, and we emphasize possibility, it may not happen, but there's a possibility they could come down. So there have been some times over the past 2.5 days where all the people there have been forced to evacuate the scene. We've talked to many emergency and rescue workers since we've been here. One man I talked to today had a story to tell me. He said that he found some parts of the United and American Airlines planes. He found the parts, he turned them over to the FBI, but he said that wasn't the most important find he made today. He said he found a Raggedy Ann doll. And he said when he did that, it brought tears to his eyes. Garrick, back to you.
Gary, just one question, a footnote, if you will. It's certainly not the most important thing right now, but the workers who were there, there are about 1,000 on each shift, we've been told, working these 12-hour shifts. Whose payroll are they on now? Of course, some are city employees, the fire department members, but they're specialists from all kinds of private concerns, bringing their expertise to bear there. Do their companies pay it? Is this a contribution? Is the city going to pay it? Is the federal government going to come in and pick up the tab?
What's happening in most cases, Garrick, you do have your New York City police officers and firemen, and you also have police officers and firemen from other municipalities in the New York area. Their departments pay them. When you have people here whose jobs have nothing to do with participating in a rescue like this, presumably, in most cases, their employers are still paying them to be here, participating in such an important venture like this one.
Thank you very much, Gary Tuchman there on the scene. Of course, what this shows us is that there are so many things in our daily lives we simply take for granted. For example, you flip a switch on the wall, an electric light comes on. You turn the faucet in your bathroom, and hot and cold running water comes pouring out. You have a fire in your home, and the fire department comes. Well, in New York City these days, New Yorkers no longer take that for granted. They've grown to appreciate the members of the New York City Fire Department for all they've done and the sacrifices they have made. Here's Richard Blystone.
These are the guys who run up the fire escape when everybody else is running down. The men who will get you out of an inferno 50 stories in the air or die trying. 30 men from this Midtown Manhattan firehouse may have died trying. They were among the first to reach the trade towers Tuesday, and they haven't come back.
So as you can see, the neighborhoods had an outpouring of love for us.
Night and day they come to leave a flower, light a candle.
I felt I did something, yes. I felt like I did something.
Hard-boiled New Yorkers.
When I was sitting out on somebody's car over there in disbelief, I had my head in my hands, and I felt somebody just kind of give a little squeeze on my arm. I look up, and it was just somebody walking past.
Total strangers, like this woman from Argentina, who says she had to come and touch the firemen. They're heroes, she says. They gave their lives, poor things, to save other people. These students from Montreal were here on a night on the town early Tuesday.
We happened to walk by, they're smiling. We said, hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you. We got on the truck, we took pictures, everybody was happy. And now we hear that some of the people who we met might be missing.
They were the first ones to go. It's just devastating. It's like, I can't believe we were here like 6 hours before this with those people.
You don't think much about firemen until you need them. But people are making up for that today, not waiting for a memorial to be built. They've created one outside the firehouse, more vibrant and more moving than anything a sculptor could carve out of stone.
Their courage and fearlessness just sets an example for the world. It's very, very powerful. And I'm honored. I'm honored to know they're just down the street from me.
If your friends are missing, it's a hard wait. A small distraction, in the words of support, the presence of food and flowers, and this present from Parsippany, New Jersey, to replace one of the station's 5 lost trucks.
Whatever you need it for, you got it. We just bought a new one. This is up for sale. You guys want it, you're more than welcome to it. We're still in business. Guys are going out. That's what we have to do. Protect the people, the city.
And so, those lucky enough to have done more than wait go home for a rest. Because it's not over. And it would be nice to think that in times to come, when the memories come flooding back, they will remember these as well. Richard Blystone, CNN, New York.
A very well-deserved tribute there from Richard Blystone. Also, this note on the political front in New York City. Last Tuesday was primary day. There's an election for mayor coming up at the end of this year. Mayor Giuliani cannot succeed himself. He's already served his allowed 2 terms. The polls opened early. Many New Yorkers are out there doing their Democratic, or in this case, Republican duty, either party in the primary election. Then at 8:45, it happened. The planes began to strike the towers. Elections were called off. Well, now the city has rescheduled the primary vote for September 25th. But if you voted last Tuesday in those early morning hours, you're going to have to go back and vote again, do it all over again, which at least will give those New Yorkers who are out early casting their ballot that very rare, perhaps once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to vote twice in the same election, even if their ballot will only be counted once. Jim, back to you.
All right, Garrett Utley, as always, thank you for that. Colleen?
All right. Thank you both. Well, jazz and blues musician Wynton Marsalis and his band joined in playing a rendition of the U.S. national anthem at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles. Marsalis and his music is about the blues. It draws joy out of tragedy, and it cannot be beaten down. Let's listen now to the Star-Spangled Banner. On that note, we are done for the evening. It is time for Jonathan Mann and Relisa Vasilova to step in to continue CNN's special coverage. We leave you this hour with some of the images from the devastated southern part of Manhattan.
And these are images of the stunning destruction of what's really a global landmark. The determination of the firefighters, the police officers there, other professionals, and of course the volunteers.
Never in my wildest imagination did I think this building was going to come down. I really believed in my heart that we were here to save people, not to carry our brothers out.
I mean, I worked on 7 World Trade. I was one of the engineers when we built it. And now here I am, taking it down.